Hello everyone, welcome to Midnight Story Channel. I'm here to help you today. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to relax. Your story is about to begin. The headlights in my rearview mirror burned like twin stars against the velvet darkness of the Nebraska plains. A relentless presence that had shadowed me for hours across the empty stretch of Highway 281. At first, I dismissed them as a coincidence, just another traveler on the same lonesome road. But as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and crimson, a creeping dread took root. The pickup truck was closer now, its silhouette growing larger, its intent unmistakable. I gripped the steering wheel of my battered Toyota Corolla, my palms slick with sweat, and whispered a futile mantra to calm my racing heart. It's nothing. You're imagining things. But deep down, I knew. This was no ordinary journey, and the shadow behind me was no mere coincidence. I'd always dreamed of a cross-country odyssey, a solitary pilgrimage to chase the horizon and find myself in the vastness of America's heartland. With a rare 2-week break from my desk job, I'd pack my car with essentials: a duffel bag, a cooler of snacks, a playlist of classic rock, and set out from Chicago, eager for the freedom of the open road. The first few days had been a revelation. I'd belted out tunes under endless skies, marveled at kitschy roadside diners, and watched sunsets that set the world ablaze. But now on the 5th day, as I traversed the desolate plains, the solitude that had once felt liberating had turned oppressive, a weight that pressed against my chest with every mile. The truck had appeared shortly after I'd stopped at a ramshackle gas station in a forgotten town called Red Willow. Its pumps rusted, and its clerk eyeing me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I'd filled my tank, grabbed a stale coffee, and hit the road again, barely noticing the dark pickup that pulled onto the highway behind me. Hours passed, the landscape a monotonous blur of golden fields and skeletal windmills, and still the truck remained, a constant in my mirror, neither overtaking nor falling back. I pushed the accelerator, the speedometer climbing, 65, 70, 75 miles per hour, but the truck matched my pace with eerie precision, its headlights unwavering, a predator pacing its prey. "You're being ridiculous, Ellie," I muttered, my voice thin in the confines of the car. "It's just someone heading the same way." But the words felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the growing certainty that something was wrong. The truck's presence was deliberate, its distance calculated, and the vast emptiness of the plains only amplified my vulnerability. I scanned the horizon for salvation, a town, a rest stop, anything. But the road stretched on, unbroken, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the gathering dusk. A faded sign announced a rest area 10 miles ahead, and I seized the chance, my heart pounding as I flicked on my blinker and veered onto the exit ramp. The rest stop was a forlorn patch of cracked pavement, its lone building housing grimy restrooms and a pair of vending machines that flickered under a dying fluorescent light. A single semi-truck idled in the far corner, its driver likely asleep, oblivious to the drama unfolding nearby. I pulled into a spot near the building, the streetlight's harsh glow casting my car in stark relief, and watched the rearview mirror, my breath shallow. The pickup followed, its engine growling as it circled the lot before parking a few spaces away, its headlights dimming but not extinguishing. I sat frozen, the engine idling, my fingers clenched around the keys. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his features obscured by the brim of a weathered cap. In the dim light, I couldn't see his face, but I felt his gaze, a palpable weight that pinned me in place. He stood there motionless, then began walking toward my car, his boots crunching on the gravel with deliberate slowness. Panic surged, a tidal wave that drowned out reason. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I peeled out of the spot, catching a glimpse of the man breaking into a run, sprinting back to his truck. I shot onto the highway, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the Corolla's engine whining as I pushed it to its limits. The speedometer climbed past 90, then 100, the car shuddering under the strain, but the truck's headlights reappeared in my mirror, blazing with relentless intent. Its engine roared, a primal sound that echoed my fear, and I chanted a desperate litany, oh God, please. What did he want? Why me? My phone, clutched in one trembling hand, showed no signal. The vast plains a dead zone that severed me from help. The truck drew closer, its grille a menacing specter filling my mirror, and I saw the driver now, a dark shape behind the windshield, his posture rigid with purpose. The car shook as I pushed it past 110 miles per hour, the engine screaming in protest. Suddenly, the truck swerved into the left lane, pulling alongside me, its bulk dwarfing my small sedan. I risked a glance and my blood froze. The driver was staring at me, his face half lit by the dashboard's glow, a twisted grin curling his lips, his eyes glinting with a malice that turned my insides to ice. He revved his engine and veered toward me, the truck's fender inches from my door. I jerked the wheel, nearly careening off the road, my tires skidding on the gravel shoulder as I fought to regain control. Up ahead, a turnoff materialized, a narrow exit ramp leading into the unknown. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard, the car fishtailing as I barreled down the ramp, narrowly avoiding a rusted guardrail. The road was a winding ribbon through rocky bluffs, its curves treacherous in the dark, but I took them at breakneck speed, the engine's wail drowning out my fear. In the mirror, the truck's headlights swung wide, its driver struggling to navigate the turn, buying me precious seconds. I pushed the car harder, trees blurring past in a frantic dance, my heart pounding with the certainty that slowing down meant death. The road twisted through a labyrinth of hills, each turn a gamble, the Corolla's tires screaming in protest. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to escape, to put distance between me and the shadow that hunted me. After what felt like an eternity, lights flickered ahead, a cluster of buildings, a promise of safety. I nearly sobbed with relief, my foot easing off the gas as I approached what looked like a gated industrial complex, its sign unreadable in the dark. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just short of heavy metal bars, a small guardhouse standing silent and empty beside the gate. No, I whispered, my eyes darting around for a way through. The gate was my only hope, but it was locked, impenetrable. The distant roar of an engine spurred me into action, and I leapt from the car, sprinting to the guardhouse, praying for a button, a lever, anything to open the gate. I'd barely reached the door when headlights flooded the area, accompanied by the growl of a powerful engine. The truck was here, barreling down the road with terrifying speed, and I knew with sickening certainty that he wouldn't stop. Not for my car, not for the gate, not for me. Instinct took over. I dove into a shallow ditch beside the road, rolling into the dirt just as the truck slammed into my Corolla with a deafening crunch. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and the impact shoved my car into the gate, which groaned but held firm. I lay there, ears ringing, too stunned to move, the truck's engine still rumbling, a menacing pulse in the night. A door opened, and heavy footsteps approached, deliberate and unhurried. "Come on out, darling," a gravelly voice called, laced with a chilling calm. "No need to hide. Just want to have a chat. Fear jolted through me, sharp and electric, and I pressed myself deeper into the ditch, willing my body to vanish. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by an eerie whistle, a tune that twisted my stomach. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "I've been watching you for days, waiting for the right moment. You're a careful one, I'll give you that. But everyone slips up eventually." My blood ran cold. Days? Had he been stalking me since Chicago? Lurking at gas stations? Watching from diner windows? Memories flickered. A dark truck at a rest stop. A man's silhouette in a parking lot. Unnoticed until now. The realization was a gut punch, a violation that fueled my terror. The footsteps stopped just above me, his boots inches from my face. The scent of tobacco and sweat heavy in the air. "Found you," he said softly, and a hand reached down, its fingers grazing my arm with an iron grip. I screamed, thrashing wildly, my nails clawing at his wrist as he dragged me up the slope. In the moonlight, I saw his face, weather-beaten, with a crooked nose and eyes like chips of flint, gleaming with cruel amusement. "Let me go," I yelled, kicking at his shins. But he was stronger, his grip unyielding as he pulled me toward the truck. I knew with a sickening certainty that if he got me inside, I was finished. Desperation surged and I twisted, sinking my teeth into his forearm, biting down until I tasted blood. He howled, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I lunged for the gate, my fingers scrabbling at the metal bars, searching for a foothold. I climbed, adrenaline drowning out the pain of barbed wire biting into my palms, my body moving faster than I thought possible. His hands grabbed at my legs, tugging hard, but I kicked back, my heel connecting with his jaw in a satisfying crunch. He grunted, stumbling, and I threw myself over the top, landing hard on the other side, the impact stealing my breath. I lay there gasping, ears straining for pursuit, but the night was silent. No footsteps, no engine, just the faint whistle of wind through the plains. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, my hands bloodied, my body trembling. Through the gate's bars, I saw him standing by his truck, motionless, his eyes locked on mine, cold and unblinking. "Better run, little sparrow," he called, his voice carrying a promise of future hunts. "I'll find you again. Real soon." He climbed into his truck, its taillights fading into the darkness, leaving me alone in the shadow of the gate. I sank to my knees, sobs racking my body, the weight of survival, a fragile victory against the terror that lingered. I was alive, but his words echoed, a chilling reminder that the plains were vast and shadows could follow anywhere. As I stumbled toward the distant lights of a town, the road stretching behind me like a scar, I vowed never to drive alone at night again, never to ignore the prickle of instinct. The shadow on the plains was gone, but its gaze lingered, a specter that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The crunch of frost-kissed leaves beneath my boots was a rhythmic hymn, the only sound in the vast stillness of the Maine wilderness, until a faint, otherworldly whisper sliced through the dusk, chilling my blood to ice. I froze, my breath clouding in the frigid air, straining to catch the sound again, but it vanished, swallowed by the sigh of wind through the towering pines. Alone in the gathering twilight, my headlamp's beam a frail spear against the encroaching dark. I couldn't shake the certainty that something, or someone, was watching, its gaze a weight that pressed against my skin. The forest, once a sanctuary of solitude, had turned sinister, its shadows alive with secrets I was never meant to uncover. I'd always been drawn to the wild, to trails where the world's clamor faded, and I could test my limits against nature's raw embrace. This trek through the Allagash wilderness was my boldest yet. A week-long solo journey through some of the most remote terrain in the Northeast, a challenge I'd prepared for with meticulous care. Months of studying topographic maps, upgrading my gear, and honing my endurance had left me ready, or so I thought. The first 3 days were a revelation: crystalline streams, moss-draped boulders, and vistas that stole my breath. But now, deep in the heart of the forest, the isolation that had thrilled me felt like a noose, tightening with every step. The silence was too perfect, the shadows too watchful, and my solitude, once a gift, had become a curse. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping paranoia. "Get a grip, Lucas," I muttered, adjusting the straps of my pack, its weight a familiar anchor. I was alone, miles from the nearest soul, and the forest was playing tricks on my mind. A snapped twig, a rustling bush, deer, foxes, nothing more. I pressed on, the trail winding deeper into the pines, their branches knitting a canopy that choked out the last vestiges of daylight. My headlamp flickered, its beam struggling to pierce the gloom, and I cursed myself for not checking the batteries before setting out. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of light through the trees, so faint I thought it was a mirage, a trick of my tired eyes. I blinked, and it was gone, but then it reappeared, a warm, amber glow like a lantern's promise. My heart leapt. A cabin, out here unmarked on any map? The prospect of shelter, perhaps even human company, was a lifeline I couldn't ignore. I veered off the trail, pushing through thick underbrush, thorns snagging at my jacket as I followed the light. The forest seemed to resist, its branches clawing at me, but I pressed on, drawn by the glow like a moth to flame. As I drew closer, the cabin took shape, a weathered log structure, its walls silvered by time, its roof sagging under the weight of years. A single window flickered with that strange, inviting light, wavering like a candle's dance. I approached cautiously, the porch groaning under my weight, each creak a warning that echoed in the stillness. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and something sharper, metallic, that set my nerves on edge. I raised a hand to knock, then hesitated, the prickle of being watched intensifying, a visceral certainty that eyes were upon me from the shadows. My instincts screamed to flee, to retrace my steps to the trail, but exhaustion and curiosity held me fast. I tried the door, its handle cold and slick under my fingers, and it swung open with a low, mournful creak, revealing a darkness that seemed to breathe. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the cabin's depths. "Anyone here?" Silence answered, thick and expectant, as I stepped inside, my headlamp casting a trembling beam across the single room. Dust motes danced in the light, and cobwebs draped the corners like forgotten veils. A rickety table stood at the center, holding a kerosene lantern, its flame burning low but steady, and beside it, impossibly, a steaming mug of coffee, its aroma rich and intoxicating after days of granola and jerky. My breath caught, a shiver running through me. Someone had been here, recently, impossibly, and yet the cabin felt abandoned, its air heavy with the weight of absence. I should have left, should have heeded the alarm bells ringing in my mind. But the warmth of the coffee was a siren's call. I set my pack down, its thud echoing in the silence, and approached the table, my fingers brushing the mug's handle. Its heat seeped into my chilled hands, a fleeting comfort that warred with the growing dread in my chest. Who had left this here, and where were they now? My eyes drifted to the far wall, where a corkboard hung, pinned with dozens of photographs. Hikers, their faces frozen in moments of joy or exhaustion, captured on trails I recognized from my maps. But in every image, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, was a figure, A dark, blurred shape lurking in the background, its presence a stain on the scene. The mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor, the sound a gunshot in the silence. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that drowned out reason as I stumbled back, my headlamp's beam dancing wildly. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing the porch steps, each creak a nail in my coffin. Panic seized me, a white-hot wave that obliterated thought. I scanned the room for a hiding place, but the cabin was too small, too exposed, its walls offering no refuge. A small window on the far wall was my only hope. I lunged for it, yanking it open with trembling hands, and squeezed through just as the door began to creak open, my body scraping against the frame. I tumbled to the ground, leaves cushioning my fall, and lay there, heart hammering, too terrified to move. Inside, I heard movement, methodical, unhurried, the sound of someone searching. Then a voice, low and gravelly, cut through the night, sending ice down my spine. "I know you're out there," it said, each word dripping with menace. "I can smell your fear." I scrambled to my feet, branches snapping under my weight, and ran, plunging into the forest's embrace, its darkness both shield and snare. The underbrush tore at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me, but I didn't slow, driven by a primal need to escape. I don't know how long I ran, time dissolving into a blur of terror and exhaustion. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but the voice followed, always just behind, taunting me with its eerie calm. "You can't outrun me," it called, echoing through the trees, a chorus from nowhere and everywhere. I collapsed against a tree, gasping, my headlamp flickering ominously, its light fading to a feeble glow. I needed a plan, a direction, but in my flight, I lost all sense of the trail. My pack abandoned in the cabin with my maps and supplies. The North Star was my only hope, but the canopy was too thick, the sky a void above. Then I saw it, a figure not 20 feet away, standing motionless between the trees, its outline gaunt and unnatural in the dim light. My breath caught, my body paralyzed as I glimpsed pale, almost translucent skin and eyes like sunken pits, gleaming with a feral hunger. I blinked, and it was gone, but it reappeared closer, then again on the other side, its movements a flicker, a taunt. It was playing with me, savoring my fear, a predator in its domain. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled, finding nothing. But when I turned back, it was there, right in front of me, its blurred face inches from mine, teeth bared in a grotesque grin. I screamed, stumbling over a root, falling hard, my hands scraping the earth as I crawled away, expecting its claws to seize me. But when I looked back, the clearing was empty, the forest silent, save for my ragged breathing. A low chuckle echoed, directionless, chilling. "Run all you want," the voice said, its tone laced with dark amusement. "You'll never leave my woods." I staggered to my feet, terror fueling a strength I didn't know I had, and ran again, crashing through bushes, leaping over logs, my only thought to escape the nightmare that hunted me. The voice pursued, a relentless shadow whispering of centuries spent stalking these pines, feeding on fear, thriving on despair. I ran until my body betrayed me, collapsing in a small clearing, my chest heaving, my vision swimming. This was it, the end, alone in the dark. Prey to a thing that defied reason. But then cutting through the night came a new sound. A dog's bark, sharp and insistent, followed by human voices calling my name. Flashlight beams swept the trees and I croaked, "Here! I'm here!" My voice hoarse but desperate. Park rangers burst into the clearing, their faces etched with concern. A German shepherd at their side, its ears pricked. "Thank God," one said, helping me to my feet. We've been searching for days since you missed your checkpoint. I tried to explain, words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. The cabin, the photos, the creature. But their expressions grew skeptical, their nods polite but disbelieving. They said I was lucky. That exposure and a concussion from my fall had nearly claimed me. That my creature was a hallucination born of trauma. They found no cabin, no photos, only my pack, abandoned in a clearing miles from where I'd thought. But as they led me to safety, I saw it one last time. A pale face in the shadows, its sunken eyes burning with rage, then gone, melting into the forest's embrace. The rangers dismissed my story, but the scars on my hands, the terror in my dreams, told a different truth. I'll never return to those woods, but sometimes, in the quiet of night, I hear that chuckle, feel those eyes, and know that something ancient and hungry still waits, patient and eternal. For the next soul to wander too far from the trail, the sun hung low over the Arizona desert, a blood-red orb sinking into the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 89. My girlfriend Clara and I had been driving for hours, our vintage Mustang rattling along the endless ribbon of highway, its engine humming a tune of freedom. We were halfway through a month-long road trip across the Southwest, a celebration of 2 years together, a last hurrah before the grind of our office jobs reclaimed us. The day had been perfect, blasting our favorite playlists, stopping at roadside stands for fresh tamales, and laughing until our sides ached. But now, as twilight painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, a faint clatter from the engine broke the spell, followed by a plume of acrid smoke that billowed from under the hood, turning our adventure into a nightmare we couldn't have foreseen. "Damn it," I muttered, easing the Mustang onto the dusty shoulder, the gravel crunching under the tires. Clara leaned forward, her brow furrowed, her dark hair catching the fading light. "What's wrong, Ryan?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry, as I popped the hood and stepped out. The desert heat still lingering despite the approaching night. Smoke poured from the engine, stinging my eyes, and I waved it away, peering at the tangle of parts with a sinking heart. I was no mechanic, but the oil-slicked components and the faint hiss of escaping steam told me we were stranded, miles from anywhere, with no hope of driving further. Clara joined me, her arms crossed against the evening chill. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her gaze sweeping the desolate highway, its emptiness stretching to infinity under the vast desert sky. I shook my head, frustration gnawing at me. Not a chance. Something's blown, and it's bad. I pulled out my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen mocked me with 0 bars. We were in a dead zone, cut off from the world, surrounded by nothing but sand, sagebrush, and the distant silhouette of jagged buttes. "We'll have to wait for someone to pass by," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe we can flag down a ride." Clara's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Out here? We haven't seen another car in ages." She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter, and I felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into this. We climbed onto the hood, the metal still warm from the day's heat, and watched the sun vanish, the desert plunging into a twilight that felt alive with unseen eyes. An hour passed, then 2, the temperature dropping sharply, the stars emerging in a sky so clear it seemed to mock our plight. Just as despair began to settle, headlights pierced the darkness, a faint glow growing brighter as a vehicle approached from the direction we'd come. Relief surged through me, and I leapt to my feet, waving my arms. "Here we go," I said, forcing a grin. The vehicle, a dust-covered pickup truck, its paint chipped and its fenders dented, slowed and pulled over, its engine idling with a low, guttural rumble. The driver's door creaked open, and a man stepped out, his silhouette lean and wiry against the truck's headlights. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a face weathered by sun and time, a scraggly beard framing a jaw set in a hard line. His flannel shirt and faded jeans seemed out of place in the desert's lingering warmth, and his eyes shadowed under a worn cap fixed on us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Car trouble?" he called, his voice rough as gravel, as he approached with a slow, deliberate stride. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, engine shot. Been stuck here a while. Any chance you could help?" He peered under the hood, his hands deft despite their calloused appearance, and let out a low whistle. "Ain't going nowhere like this. Nearest town's about 50 miles back." My heart sank. The distance a death sentence on foot, especially in the dark. He seemed to sense my despair, his lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile. "I can give y'all a lift if you're willing. Heading that way myself." I glanced at Clara, her expression wary, her hand tightening on my arm. Getting into a stranger's truck in the middle of nowhere went against every instinct. But the desert night was closing in, and our options were dwindling. "That'd be a lifesaver," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you." "Name's Vernon," he said, extending a hand that felt like sandpaper against mine. "Grab what you need and hop in." We retrieved our backpacks from the Mustang, locking it with a futile hope it'd still be there come morning, and climbed into the truck's cab. The interior reeked of stale cigarettes and something sharper, metallic, that twisted my stomach. A scent I couldn't place, but that set my nerves on edge. Vernon started the engine, the truck lurching forward with a growl, and we settled into an uneasy silence, the desert blurring past in a haze of dust and shadow. At first, Vernon was chatty, asking about our trip, our hometowns, his voice warm but laced with a curiosity that felt too probing. "Y'all from the city, huh? Bet this desert's a whole new world for you," he said, his eyes flicking to Clara in the rearview mirror, lingering just a moment too long. I nodded, keeping my answers vague, my unease growing with every mile. Clara's hand found mine, her grip tight, her silence a mirror to my own apprehension. The smell in the cab grew stronger, a sour, coppery tang that reminded me of something I couldn't name. And I noticed Vernon's hands, knuckles scarred, fingers twitching as if eager for something to grasp. We'd been driving for about 30 minutes when Vernon veered off the highway onto a rutted dirt road, the truck bouncing over uneven terrain. "Shortcut," he said, catching my startled look. "Cuts off a good chunk of time." His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, a challenge that dared me to object. I wanted to protest, to demand we stay on the main road, but the words stuck in my throat, silenced by the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Clara's nails dug into my palm, her breath quickening, and I knew she felt it too, the shift from unease to outright fear. The road wound through a desolate stretch of desert, the headlights revealing only scrub brush and rocky outcrops. The world beyond a void of black. Vernon fell silent, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, his jaw set in a way that made my heart race. The metallic smell was overpowering now, a stench that clawed at my memory, and I realized with a jolt what it was. Blood, faint but unmistakable. My stomach churned, and I glanced at Clara, her face pale in the dashboard's dim glow, her eyes wide with the same realization. After 10 jarring minutes, Vernon pulled to a stop in front of a dilapidated structure, an abandoned service station, its windows boarded, its sign hanging crookedly, the letters faded to illegibility. "Gotta make a quick stop," he said, cutting the engine. "Won't be a minute." He stepped out, slamming the door, and disappeared into the station's shadowed entrance, leaving us in the truck, the silence heavy with dread. "We need to get out of here," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. her eyes locked on the station. Something's wrong, Ryan, I can feel it. I nodded, my mouth dry, my mind racing for a plan. I know, but where do we go? We're in the middle of nowhere. Before she could reply, a sound froze us both. A muffled scream, high and desperate, coming from inside the station. It came again, louder, a woman's voice, raw with terror, pleading for help. My blood ran cold, every instinct screaming that we were in mortal danger. "Oh my God!" Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "There's someone in there?" I reached for the door handle, my heart pounding, but before I could act, Vernon reappeared, sliding into the driver's seat with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "All set," he said, his voice unnaturally cheerful, his eyes glinting with something predatory. "Let's hit the road." I caught Clara's gaze, a silent agreement passing between us. We couldn't leave, not if someone was in danger. "Actually," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, "I need to use the restroom. Is that okay?" Vernon's smile vanished, his eyes narrowing to slits. "No need for that. We're almost there." His tone was a warning, a line drawn in the sand. "Please," I insisted, my voice shaking but firm. "It'll just take a second." For a moment, I thought he'd refuse, his hand twitching toward his pocket. But then he shrugged, the gesture too casual, too practiced. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice low, "but make it quick." I stepped out, my legs unsteady, and headed toward the station, hearing Vernon's door open behind me. "I'll come with you," he said, too close, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Make sure you don't get lost." Panic surged, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I reached the station's door, my hand on the handle, and blurted, "I heard someone screaming. What's going on in there?" The pretense was gone, my fear laid bare. Vernon's face twisted into a snarl, his mask of civility shattering. "You should have kept your nose out of it, kid." He lunged faster than I'd expected, his fingers grazing my jacket. I shoved him hard, sending him stumbling, and sprinted back to the truck, yelling, "Clara, run!" She was already out, her face pale with terror, and we bolted into the desert, hand in hand, the scrub brush tearing at our clothes. Vernon's curses echoed behind us, his footsteps heavy as he gave chase, the beam of his flashlight swinging wildly. We ran blindly, stumbling over rocks, the desert a maze of shadows and danger. Clara tripped, crying out, and I hauled her up, my heart pounding as Vernon's shouts grew closer, his rage a tangible force. He tackled me from behind, his weight driving me into the sand, the air forced from my lungs. I struggled, but he was stronger, his hands pinning me down. "Get off him!" Clara screamed, and I saw her swing a rock, the impact cracking against Vernon's skull. He grunted, rolling off me, and I scrambled to my feet, gasping. Vernon was already rising, blood trickling down his face, his eyes blazing with fury. He reached into his pocket, pulling a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Time slowed, my mind racing for a weapon. My hand closed around a rusted pipe half buried in the sand, its weight cold and solid. As Vernon lunged at Clara, I swung, the pipe connecting with his skull in a sickening crunch. He dropped, motionless, the knife falling from his hand. For a moment we stood frozen, panting, the desert silent save for our ragged breaths. "Is he?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. I checked his pulse, my hands shaking. "He's alive," I said, relief and dread warring within me. "But we need to check the station." We approached cautiously, the back door secured with a heavy padlock. I smashed it open with the pipe, my arms aching, and we stepped inside, flipping a switch that brought flickering fluorescence to life. The sight was a nightmare. Cages lined the walls, their occupants too horrific to describe, a tableau of suffering that seared itself into my memory. We freed them, their gratitude a quiet sob in the dark, and called the police from an ancient landline, the operator's voice a lifeline in the chaos. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights. Ambulances and FBI agents, their questions relentless. Vernon, it turned out, was a monster who'd preyed on travelers for years. His crimes a dark stain on the desert. They called us heroes, but the label felt hollow. The memory of his eyes in the rearview mirror. The stench of blood in his truck, a weight we'd carry forever. Clara and I don't take road trips anymore. The open road now a place of shadows, not freedom. But sometimes in the quiet of night, I see that station, hear those screams, and wonder how many others fell to the driver in the dust. Their stories lost to the desert's endless silence. The storm roared into Portland like a vengeful spirit, its winds screaming through the narrow streets, rattling the windows of my fourth-floor apartment with a ferocity that shook the old brick building to its bones. I'd always loved thunderstorms, their raw power a reminder of nature's untamed heart. But this one was different, fierce, unrelenting, and cloaked in an oppressive darkness that swallowed the city whole. The power had failed hours ago, plunging my cozy loft into shadow, and I'd settled in with a cluster of candles, their flickering flames casting restless shapes on the exposed brick walls. My emergency radio crackled with reports of widespread outages, warning that it could be dawn before the lights returned. Alone in my sanctuary, cut off from the world, I felt a growing unease, a whisper that the night held more than just wind and rain. I lived in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, a space I'd made my own with bookshelves, plants, and a mismatched collection of thrift store furniture. Usually the hum of neighbors' lives, muted conversations, the clink of dishes filtered through the walls, a comforting reminder of community. But tonight the building was silent, the storm's fury drowning out all traces of humanity. My phone was useless, the cell towers knocked out by the gale, and the isolation was a weight pressing against my chest as I paced the hardwood floor, the candlelight trembling with every gust. I tried to distract myself, tuning the radio to a staticky jazz station, but the notes felt hollow, unable to pierce the night's heavy veil. It was nearing midnight when a sound cut through the storm's din, a faint, deliberate scratching at my front door, like nails dragging across wood. I froze, my heart lurching, the radio's saxophone fading into the background. At first, I thought it might be a stray branch, caught by the wind and scraping the door frame, but as I listened, the sound grew more rhythmic, more intentional, punctuated by the soft clink of metal against metal. Someone was out there, in the pitch-black hallway, tampering with my lock. Fear wrapped around me, its icy tendrils tightening, and I stood rooted to the spot, straining to hear over the storm's roar. The scratching persisted, methodical, relentless, a predator testing its prey's defenses. My mind raced, conjuring images of opportunists prowling the blackout, exploiting the city's vulnerability, or worse, someone with a darker purpose, drawn to my door by chance or intent. I lived alone, a fact I'd always cherished, but now it was a liability. My solitude a beacon for whatever lurked outside. I scanned the room for a weapon, cursing my decision to forgo the pepper spray my brother had urged me to buy. The best I could find was a heavy cast-iron bookend, its weight cold and reassuring in my trembling hands. Scratching stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it was deafening. The storm's howl a distant echo, then a soft click, the lock disengaging, a sound that shattered my fragile calm. Panic surged, a white-hot wave that propelled me toward the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. If I could slide the chain lock into place, maybe I could buy time, keep them out. I reached for the chain, my fingers fumbling in the dark, the candlelight casting my shadow in a frantic dance. But as my hand brushed the metal, the door began to creak open. a sliver of darkness widening in the gap. Time slowed, each second stretching into eternity. A hand appeared, pale, skeletal, its fingers curling around the door's edge. Instinct took over, and I threw my weight against the door, slamming it shut with a force that reverberated through the apartment. A sickening crunch followed, accompanied by a howl of pain, raw and guttural, as the hand vanished, the intruder stumbling back into the hallway. My chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through me, and I fumbled with the locks, sliding the chain into place. Then the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage. "I've called the police," I shouted, my voice quivering but loud, hoping the lie would carry conviction. "They're on their way." It was a desperate bluff. The phone's dead. The city paralyzed, but I prayed it would be enough to drive them off. For a moment, silence reigned, the storm's fury a muted backdrop. Then a voice slithered through the door, low and raspy, dripping with a rage that turned my blood to ice. "You shouldn't have done that, girl." The words were a blade, sharp and personal, slicing through my defenses. This wasn't a random thief, a faceless opportunist. This was someone who knew I was here, who wanted me to suffer. A thud shook the door, the wood groaning under the impact, and I backed away, clutching the bookend like a talisman. Another thud, louder, the frame splintering, and I knew the locks wouldn't hold for long. My eyes darted to the window, where the fire escape offered a perilous escape, its metal rungs slick with rain. But my only hope, I sprinted to the bedroom, the storm's icy breath lashing my face as I yanked open the window. The fire escape loomed, a skeletal ladder descending into the alley below, its surface gleaming under the downpour. I climbed out, the wind buffeting me, my hands slipping on the wet metal. One floor down, then two, my heart pounding as I fought to keep my balance. A flash of lightning illuminated the night, and I froze, my breath catching as I glanced up. There, framed in my bedroom window, was a figure, tall, gaunt, its eyes glinting with an unnatural glow, its silhouette a nightmare etched against the storm. I scrambled down the final rungs, dropping to the alley with a jolt that sent pain shooting through my ankles. The rain was a deluge, soaking me to the bone, my clothes clinging as I ran, the pavement slick under my bare feet. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape, to put distance between me and the thing that hunted me. The city was a labyrinth of shadows, its streets deserted, the blackout rendering it a ghost town. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my mind a whirl of fear and questions. Who was he? Why me? The voice had been so personal, so filled with intent, as if I'd been chosen. The streets twisted, unfamiliar in the dark, the storm distorting landmarks I thought I knew. I stumbled into an older part of the city, where the buildings were crumbling relics, their facades pitted by time. Exhaustion clawed at me, my legs trembling, but the fear of pursuit drove me on. That's when I saw it, a small church, its stone facade weathered but sturdy, its arched door ajar, spilling a warm golden light onto the rain-slicked street. The faint sound of singing drifted out, a hymn soft and steady, a beacon in the chaos. I staggered toward it, my strength failing, and collapsed at the threshold, my knees buckling as the storm raged behind me. An elderly woman in a nun's habit appeared, her face etched with concern, her eyes kind but searching. "My dear," she said, helping me to my feet, her grip surprisingly strong. "What's happened to you?" I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat, my body shaking with cold and fear. She led me inside into a small room off the main chapel, where others huddled, refugees from the storm, their faces weary but alive. The room smelled of wax and old wood, the flicker of candles casting a gentle glow. and I sank onto a cot, a blanket draped over my shoulders, a cup of hot tea pressed into my trembling hands. Her name was Sister Agnes, and as the warmth seeped back into my bones, I poured out my story. The scratching, the intruder, the chase through the storm-swept streets. She listened, her expression grave, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You're safe here," she said when I finished, her voice steady. "This is sacred ground. No evil can enter." Her words were a comfort, but as I glanced at the shadowed corners, the candles dance a reminder of the dark beyond, I couldn't fully believe them. The intruder's voice, his glowing eyes lingered, a specter that refused to fade. The night wore on, and I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every creak, every gust of wind. Sister Agnes was there each time, her presence a quiet anchor, her murmured prayers a shield against the fear. As dawn broke, the storm subsided, its fury spent, and the others began to leave, returning to their lives in a city slowly coming back to life. But I couldn't go, not yet. The thought of my apartment a wound too raw to touch. Sister Agnes seemed to understand, bringing me more tea, sitting with me as the morning light filtered through the stained glass windows. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the weight of the night pressing down. She took my hand, her touch warm and grounding. "You survived," she said softly. "That's where you begin. Now, you heal." Her words were simple, but they carried a strength that stirred something within me. A flicker of hope, fragile but real. The police arrived later, their uniforms stark against the church's quiet sanctity. I gave my statement, recounting the intrusion, the chase, but their faces were skeptical, their questions tinged with doubt. With no evidence, no witnesses, my story was just another tale in a city full of shadows. They promised to patrol my building, but I knew I couldn't return, not to a place tainted by that voice, those eyes. Sister Agnes helped me find a shelter, a temporary refuge until I could rebuild. And as I prepared to leave, she pressed a small silver pendant into my hand, a cross, its edges worn but warm. "For protection," she said, her smile gentle but firm. I slipped it over my neck, its weight a quiet comfort, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." She nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. The darkness can seem all-consuming, but there is always light, my dear. You just have to seek it. I stepped into the morning sun, blinking at its brilliance, the city stirring around me as power returned. Life resuming as if the night had been a dream. But I knew better. The intruder was out there, his raspy threat a promise unfulfilled, and I'd seen the darkness that lurked in the storm's shadow. As I walked toward the shelter, the pendant cool against my skin, I carried a new resolve: to heal, to rebuild, to never let fear define me. The tempest had passed, but its echoes remained, a reminder that safety is fragile, and some shadows never truly fade. The forest exhaled a crisp, pine-scented breath as twilight draped the Oregon Cascades in a shroud of violet and gray. The chatter of birds fading into an eerie hush that pressed against my ears. Our camping trip was meant to be a sanctuary, a weekend retreat for me, my best friend Nate, his partner Ellie, and our old college buddy Sam. A chance to escape the city's clamor and reconnect under a canopy of stars. We pitched our tents in a secluded glade deep within the Siuslaw National Forest, far from the crowded trails and RV parks, a hidden gem we'd found on an obscure hiking forum. The first day had been a dream, laughter echoing through the trees, the crackle of a campfire, the taste of charred marshmallows lingering on our tongues. But now, as darkness settled over the hollow, a primal stillness gripped the air, and the snap of a twig in the underbrush sent a shiver down my spine, a warning that our paradise was about to become a hunting ground. We'd driven up from Portland, our SUV packed with gear, and a playlist of 90s hits, stopping at a weathered general store in the last hamlet before the forest's edge. The clerk, an old man with eyes like chipped flint, had given us a long, searching look when we mentioned our destination. Not many folks head up to Blackthorn Hollow these days, he'd said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Used to be a popular spot, but things changed. Watch yourselves out there. We'd laughed it off, chalking it up to small-town folklore, the kind of tale spun to spook city slickers. If only we'd heeded his warning, we might have avoided the terror that waited in the shadows. The first night was everything we'd hoped for. We set up camp in a clearing by a burbling creek, the pines standing sentinel around us, their branches swaying in the evening breeze. We roasted hot dogs, swapped ghost stories, and stayed up past midnight, our voices mingling with the chorus of crickets and owls. The stars were a revelation, a glittering tapestry unmarred by city lights. And I remember thinking, as I crawled into my tent, that this was what life was meant to be. Simple, raw, connected. But the second day brought a shift, subtle at first, like a cloud passing over the sun. Our morning hike through moss-draped trails and hidden glades was exhilarating. But as we trekked back to camp, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the birds falling silent, the wind dying to a whisper. Anyone else notice how quiet it is? I asked, pausing on the trail, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The others stopped, their faces mirroring my unease. Nate, always the skeptic, shrugged, but his eyes darted to the trees. Probably just a hawk or something. Scaring the critters, he said, his tone less certain than usual. Ellie clutched his arm, her gaze scanning the underbrush, while Sam, usually the joker, was uncharacteristically silent, his brow furrowed. A twig snapped nearby, sharp and deliberate, and we spun toward the sound, finding only shadows and swaying ferns. Just a deer, Ellie said, her voice tight, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her doubt. We hurried back to camp, our laughter replaced by a wary silence, the forest beauty now laced with an unspoken threat. Back at the clearing, our tent stood untouched, our gear neatly arranged, but the air felt heavier, as if the hollow itself were watching, waiting. We busied ourselves with dinner, chopping vegetables and stoking the fire, but the sense of being observed clung to us like damp cloth. As dusk fell, the crackle of the flames was our only comfort, its light a fragile barrier against the encroaching dark. That's when we heard it, the low growl of an engine growing louder, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel. A vehicle was approaching, an impossibility on the narrow logging road that led to our camp, a path we'd barely navigated ourselves. Headlights pierced the trees, and a battered pickup truck burst into the clearing, skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust that shimmered in the firelight. 3 men climbed out, their silhouettes hulking against the truck's glare. They were rough-hewn, clad in stained flannel and camouflage, their faces shadowed by scruffy beards and caps pulled low. The leader, a grizzled man with a scar slicing down his cheek, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with a predatory intensity that made my stomach lurch. "Well, look at this," he drawled, his voice a low rumble, his gaze sweeping over us like a hunter sizing up prey. "What we got here?" Nate, ever the diplomat, stood, forcing a smile. "Hey there, folks, just camping for the weekend. Didn't mean to step on any toes. This your land?" His tone was conciliatory, but his fists were clenched, his body tensed for trouble. The scarred man's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "This ain't your land, city boy. This here's our territory. Been ours for generations." His words were a claim, a challenge, and I felt the air shift, the night growing colder, more hostile. The other 2 men flanked him, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. But the threat was unmistakable. My heart pounded, the reality of our isolation crashing over me. We were miles from help, our phones useless, our SUV our only lifeline. We didn't know, Ellie said, her voice trembling, her hands twisting in her lap. We're happy to pack up and go if there's a problem. The leader tilted his head considering, then shook his head, his grin widening to reveal yellow teeth. Nah, you ain't going nowhere. Not till we figure out what to do with you. His tone was final, a sentence passed, and I saw the glint of a shotgun in his hands, its barrel catching the firelight. The other men chuckled, a low, menacing sound that tightened the knot in my chest. What followed was a waking nightmare. They forced us to sit by the fire, their presence a suffocating weight as they rifled through our tents, helping themselves to our food, our beer, our privacy. They taunted us, their crude jokes and veiled threats laced with a glee that turned my blood to ice. Nate's jaw clenched, his anger simmering, and I prayed he'd keep it in check, knowing one wrong move could ignite the powder keg around us. Ellie's eyes were wide with fear, Sam's face pale, and I felt my own resolve fraying, the forest no longer a refuge but a cage. As night deepened, the men's mood grew darker, their banter turning to arguments, their voices rising with a volatile edge. I caught fragments of their talk, something about teaching a lesson, about showing these outsiders. My stomach churned, the certainty of their intent settling like a stone. We needed to escape, to break free before their drunken rage turned lethal. I caught Nate's eye nodding subtly toward the woods, a silent plan forming. He whispered to Ellie and Sam, their faces tightening with resolve, and we waited, muscles coiled, for a chance to flee. The moment came when the youngest man, swaying from too much beer, stumbled into the trees to relieve himself. It was now or never. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches clawing at our faces, the forest a blur of shadow and panic. Behind us, shouts erupted, raw with fury, followed by a sound that would haunt me forever. The deafening boom of a shotgun. The blast missed, pellets shredding leaves inches from my head. But the terror drove us faster. Adrenaline a wildfire in our veins. Another shot rang out, then another, wild and reckless. The men firing blindly into the dark, their rage a beast unleashed. We ran, our lungs burning, our legs trembling, the forest a maze of roots and thorns. The sounds of pursuit, crashing branches, bellowed curses, followed, relentless, their voices thick with bloodlust. You can't hide, the leader roared, his words a whip that spurred us on. We ran for what felt like hours, exhaustion clawing at us, the night an endless gauntlet. The shouts faded, then vanished, but we didn't stop, too terrified to trust the silence, our fear a living thing that refused to let go. Finally, our bodies gave out and we collapsed in a shallow ravine, gasping, our clothes torn, our faces streaked with dirt and sweat. What do we do now? Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I looked at my friends, their fear mirroring my own, and forced a steadiness I didn't feel. We keep moving, head downhill. We'll hit a road eventually, find help. It was a fragile plan, born of desperation, but it was all we had. We trudged through the night, jumping at every rustle, every snap, convinced the hunters were still out there, their rifles trained on us. The forest was a labyrinth, its beauty turned treacherous, each shadow a potential threat. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, we heard it, the hum of tires, the sweetest sound I'd ever known. We stumbled onto a highway, waving frantically at an approaching delivery van. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stopped, her face creasing with concern as she took in our disheveled state. You kids okay? She asked, unlocking the doors. We piled in, our story spilling out in a jumbled rush, and she drove us to a sheriff's station. Her calm presence, a lifeline. The police were skeptical, their questions probing but tinged with doubt. They found our campsite littered with beer cans, cigarette butts, and spent shells. But the men were gone, vanished into the forest depths. A manhunt was launched, but the hollow was vast, its secrets well guarded. And I knew deep down, those hunters were still out there, their territory undisturbed. We returned to Portland, our lives forever altered. The forest call replaced by a fear that lingered like a bruise. Years have passed, but the memory of that night is a scar, vivid and raw. I haven't set foot in the woods since. The rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig, enough to send me back to that hollow running for my life. My friends and I rarely speak of it, but I see it in their eyes. The way Nate scans the horizon, the way Ellie flinches at sudden noises. We were lucky, but the question haunts me. Are they still out there? Those hunters, waiting in the shadows of Blackthorn Hollow for the next souls to cross their path? I pray not, but I stick to the city now, where the lights never fade and the only predators are the ones I can see. The sprawling warehouse crouched like a slumbering giant on the edge of Indianapolis, its corrugated steel walls glinting dully under the sodium glow of streetlights, a monument to industry's forgotten dreams. I'd been working the night shift at Horizon Logistics for nearly a year, a solitary vigil from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., patrolling the cavernous aisles with a flashlight and a clipboard, ensuring the locks held and the shadows stayed empty. My name's Jonah, and though the job was a far cry from my ambitions of becoming a documentary filmmaker, it paid the bills and gave me quiet hours to scribble ideas for my next project, a gritty expose on urban decay. But tonight, as I navigated the labyrinth of crates and pallets, a faint glow beneath a locked door sent a shiver through me, a whisper that I'd stumbled into a secret that could cost me everything. Horizon Logistics was a behemoth, a maze of towering shelves and endless corridors, its daytime bustle of forklifts and shouting workers giving way to an eerie stillness at night. My rounds were routine. Check the perimeter, test the alarms, log any anomalies. The warehouse was my domain, its quirks familiar, the groan of cooling metal, the flicker of overhead lights, the faint hum of refrigeration units. But tonight the air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken menace. Each echo of my footsteps on the concrete floor sharper, more ominous. I chalked it up to fatigue, to too many late nights hunched over my laptop. But the unease lingered, a quiet pulse that refused to fade. It was just past 1 a.m., halfway through my patrol of the Western Wing, when I noticed it, a thin sliver of light seeping from beneath the door of Storage Bay 23, a unit that had been marked vacant for months, its contents supposedly cleared out by a bankrupt retailer. I paused, my flashlight beam trembling slightly, the glow and anomaly that set my nerves on edge. Bay 23 was off limits, its padlock untouched since I'd started, and the sight of that light, faint but undeniable, was a violation of the warehouse's silent order. I reached for my radio, my thumb hovering over the call button, but hesitated. If this was nothing, a forgotten bulb, a maintenance oversight, I'd face a reprimand from my supervisor, a man with little patience for overzealous reports. Curiosity tinged with dread won out, and I approached the door, my boots silent on the polished floor. The smell hit me first as I cracked the door open, a caustic chemical stench that burned my nostrils, a blend of ammonia, bleach, and something darker, more sinister, that made my eyes water. I stifled a cough, blinking away tears, and swung my flashlight into the unit, its beam slicing through the gloom. What I saw froze my blood, a makeshift laboratory, its tables cluttered with beakers, tubes, and burners. a setup that looked ripped from a dystopian film. At the center stood a large, industrial apparatus bubbling and hissing, its contents glowing faintly under the dim fluorescent strips overhead. It didn't take a chemist to recognize what this was: a drug lab, vast and sophisticated, a secret empire hidden in the warehouse's shadows. My mind reeled, questions tumbling over each other like stones in a landslide. How long had this been here? Who was behind it? And most pressing, what did I do now? The scale of the operation, the precision of the equipment, the sheer volume of chemicals pointed to something far beyond a small-time hustle. This was the work of a cartel, a network with resources and reach. And the thought of their influence infiltrating Horizon sent a chill down my spine. I should have called the police, should have run to the security office and sounded the alarm, but a deeper fear held me back. If they could set up a lab this elaborate under our noses, who was complicit? A coworker? My boss? The uncertainty was a trap, paralyzing me as I stood in the doorway, the lab's eerie glow casting my shadow long and distorted. A sound snapped me back to reality. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing from deeper within the unit. I killed my flashlight, plunging myself into near darkness, and ducked behind a stack of empty crates, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would betray me. Two men emerged from behind a tarp-draped partition, their silhouettes stark against the lab's faint light. One was lean, his arms a canvas of jagged tattoos, his movements jittery, like a wire pulled taut. The other was a mountain of a man, his shaved head gleaming, his eyes cold and lifeless, like a shark's. They spoke in hushed tones, their words fragmented but chilling. "Shipment's late again," the lean one muttered. "Boss ain't happy." The big man grunted, his voice a low growl. "Told you we should have stayed with the Colombians. These new guys are sloppy." I held my breath, my body pressed against the crates, praying the shadows would hide me. They stood between me and the exit, their presence a wall of menace, and I knew that if they spotted me, I was as good as dead. Their conversation drifted to logistics, territories, payoffs, a rival crew muscling in, each word a brick in the tower of danger I'd stumbled into. After what felt like an eternity, they moved back behind the partition, their footsteps fading, and I seized my chance, creeping toward the door with agonizing care. I slipped out, easing it shut, and ran, my lungs burning, not stopping until I reached the security office, its fluorescent hum a fragile sanctuary. I collapsed into my chair, sweat soaking my uniform, my mind a whirlwind of fear and indecision. The police were the obvious choice, but a chilling thought stopped me cold. How had this lab gone unnoticed? The equipment, the deliveries, the personnel. It would have taken coordination, cover, someone on the inside turning a blind eye or worse. My supervisor, a man with a temper and a penchant for secrecy, flashed in my mind. Could he be involved? The night crew, always cagey, always watching. The uncertainty was a noose tightening with every question. I sat there, the clock ticking toward dawn, weighing a choice that could unravel my life. Speak out and risk retaliation, or stay silent and let the poison spread. In the end, I chose caution, a decision born of fear, but tempered by resolve. I needed proof, a shield against the unknown. I clocked out at 7 a.m., my face a mask of normalcy, but instead of heading home, I drove to a public library, its quiet stacks a refuge from the chaos in my head. I spent hours researching drug cartels, clandestine labs, and whistleblower protections, my notebook filling with frantic scribbles. That night, I returned to work armed with a plan and tools. I'd bought a compact camera and a digital recorder, small enough to conceal, And as I patrolled, I kept my eyes sharp, my senses attuned to anything out of place. It didn't take long to spot a suspect. Carlos, a forklift operator on the night shift, whose frequent trips to Bay 23 were marked by furtive glances and hurried steps. I shadowed him, snapping photos from the shadows, capturing his exchanges with unfamiliar men in unmarked vans. I overheard snippets of phone calls, talk of product and distribution routes, and recorded them, my hands trembling but steady. Over the next week, I built a dossier, images of chemical drums, audio of coded conversations, notes on suspicious coworkers. I was careful, never lingering too long, always watching my back, but the paranoia grew, a constant companion that shadowed my every move. Every glance from a colleague, every unexpected noise, sent my heart racing. My apartment became a fortress, its locks checked obsessively, my sleep fractured by nightmares of discovery. I knew I was playing a deadly game, that these were professionals with no qualms about silencing a threat. After 2 weeks, my evidence was substantial, a digital archive of a hidden empire, and I could delay no longer. The local police were a risk, too likely to be compromised in a city where money talked. Instead, I contacted the Indiana State Police, sending an anonymous tip with a sample of my findings. My heart in my throat as I hit send. The wait was torture, each shift a tightrope walk, my eyes scanning for signs I'd been exposed. On a Friday night, as I patrolled the warehouse's silent corridors, the air erupted with chaos. Armed agents swarmed the building, their movements precise, their voices sharp with authority. They secured exits, rounded up workers, and breached Bay 23. The shouts and clatter of handcuffs, a symphony of justice. I watched from a shadowed alcove, relief flooding me as Carlos and others were led out, their faces a mix of shock and fury. An agent approached, his badge glinting, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Carter, we need to speak with you." The next hours were a blur of interviews, my evidence laid bare, their questions probing but respectful. "You took a hell of a risk," one agent said, his tone a mix of admiration and warning. "This is a major cartel trying to sink roots in the Midwest. They'd have killed you without a second thought." The weight of my actions crashed over me, the narrowness of my escape a cold reality. My evidence helped dismantle the lab and a significant chunk of the cartel's operations, saving countless lives. But the victory was bittersweet, shadowed by the cost. The state police offered witness protection, a new identity, a new life far from Indianapolis. Part of me wanted to refuse, to cling to the world I knew. But the cartel's reach was long, their memory longer. I said yes, leaving behind my friends, my dreams of filmmaking, my very name. Now, in a small coastal town, I'm someone else. A barista with a quiet life. My past a secret locked away. But sometimes a whiff of chemicals, sharp, acrid, wrong, sends me back to that warehouse, to the bubbling vats and the shadows that hid them. I know I did right, but the price was my old self. And though I carry the weight of survival, I hold fast to the truth. Some secrets are worth exposing, no matter the cost. The cobblestone streets of Krakow pulsed with life, a vibrant tapestry of laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of a city that never truly slept. I'd been backpacking through Europe for 2 months, chasing the freedom of my post-college years before the corporate world claimed me. From Paris's glittering boulevards to Budapest's thermal baths, I'd soaked in the continent's kaleidoscope of cultures, each city a new chapter in my adventure. But after weeks of crowded hostels and tourist-clogged landmarks, I craved something quieter, a glimpse of the authentic Europe untouched by guidebooks. That's when I met them, Jan and Helena, an elderly couple with weathered faces and warm smiles, in a cozy cafe tucked away in Krakow's old town. Their invitation to visit their remote village in the Polish countryside seemed like a gift, a chance to step off the beaten path. If only I'd known that their hospitality was a lure, drawing me into a trap from which escape would come at a terrible cost. The cafe was a haven of polished wood and flickering candlelight, its air thick with the scent of fresh pierogi and strong coffee. I'd been sketching in my journal, capturing the faces of passers-by, when Jan and Helena struck up a conversation, their English accented but fluent. They spoke of their village, restful, with a reverence that painted it as a paradise. Stone cottages nestled in rolling hills, fields of wildflowers swaying under endless skies. A community bound by traditions older than memory. "It's not on any map," Helena said, her eyes twinkling with pride. "We don't get many visitors, but those who come leave changed." Their words were a siren's call, and when they offered me a ride the next morning, I accepted without hesitation, my wanderlust outweighing the faint prickle of caution. The drive was a journey into another world, the city's clamor fading as we wound through forests of birch and pine, the road narrowing to a ribbon of gravel that snaked into the Carpathian foothills. My phone lost signal an hour out, its screen a useless glow, but I brushed aside the unease, captivated by the landscape's raw beauty. John and Helena filled the hours with stories of Viersbo's ancient festivals, of harvests blessed by the land spirit, each tale weaving a spell that made the village feel like a fairy tale come to life. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across mist-shrouded valleys, we arrived. The village emerging like a dream from the haze. Stone houses with red-tiled roofs clustered around a cobbled square. A medieval church at Sentinel, its spire piercing the twilight. Chickens clucked in tidy yards. In the air carried the smoky tang of burning oak, a scene so idyllic it seemed painted on glass. The villagers greeted me with open arms, their faces weathered but kind, their voices warm as they welcomed me to the guest house. A quaint building with lace curtains and a creaking wooden staircase. "You're our guest," Jan said, his handshake firm, his eyes lingering a moment too long. "Stay as long as you like." That first night, I dined at the village's only tavern, a low-ceilinged room alive with laughter and the clink of mugs. The food was hearty, cabbage rolls, rye bread, a dark, frothy ale, and the villagers were eager, almost too eager, to hear my stories of America, their questions probing, their smiles unwavering. I felt like a minor celebrity, my exhaustion from the journey melting under their attention, but beneath the warmth a subtle discord hummed, a note I couldn't yet name. The next morning I woke to a breakfast of fresh eggs and honeyed bread, laid out in the guest house's dining room, but Jan and Helena were absent, their absence unexplained. I spent the day exploring, wandering cobblestone paths, chatting with villagers who shared their daily tasks, tending gardens, mending fences, with a pride that bordered on reverence. But as I moved through Viersbo, I noticed peculiarities, conversations that halted when I approached, glances exchanged behind my back, smiles that never reached their eyes. The village was a perfect tableau, yet it felt staged, as if I were an actor in a play whose script I hadn't read. By afternoon, the unease was a weight pressing against my chest, and I resolved to leave the next day, citing a fictional deadline to avoid offense. That night, the village square erupted in a festival, a riot of music and color under a sky ablaze with stars. Villagers danced in circles, their boots stomping to the wail of fiddles, their faces flushed with ale and joy. I joined in, swept up by the energy, my doubts dulled by the tavern's potent brew. But as the night wore on, the mood shifted, the music growing wilder, the villagers' eyes glinting with an intensity that chilled me. When I mentioned leaving, John's smile tightened. his hand gripping my arm. "Leave," he said, his voice a velvet blade. "But you've only just arrived, Lucas. There's so much more to see." His words were kind, but his eyes were cold, a flicker of menace that sent my heart racing. I excused myself, retreating to the guest house, my pulse hammering. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I needed to escape. But the next morning, my plans unraveled. The road out was blocked, a landslide, the villagers claimed, their faces unreadable as they assured me it would clear soon. "Why rush?" Helena said, her smile a mask. "You're one of us now." Her words were a chain, binding me to Veersbo, and my attempts to leave were thwarted at every turn. No phone signal, no landlines, the villagers always watching, their presence a constant pressure. My backpack, left in my room, was unpacked, my clothes neatly folded in a dresser, as if the village itself refused to let me go. The days blurred, each one a tightening noose. I played along, smiling through my fear, but the villagers' warmth grew brittle, their eyes hungry, their whispers trailing me like shadows. The fifth night brought another festival, darker than the first, the villagers donning carved wooden masks, their chants in a tongue I didn't recognize, a guttural cadence that raised the hairs on my neck. I watched from my window, terror rooting me in place, the realization dawning that this was my last chance to escape. I waited until the festival reached its peak, the square a frenzy of firelight and shadow, then slipped out the guest house's back door, my heart pounding as I crept toward the forest edge. I'd barely reached the trees when shouts erupted. They'd seen me. I ran, branches whipping my face, the forest a labyrinth of roots and darkness. Behind me, the villagers pursued, their chants morphing into howls that were barely human, their footsteps a thunderous tide. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs trembling. The forest embraced both shield and snare. Just when I thought I'd collapse, lights flickered through the trees, a highway, its asphalt a lifeline. I burst from the underbrush, waving frantically at an approaching car, its headlights a beacon in the night. The driver, a grizzled trucker, screeched to a halt, his face creasing with concern as I scrambled in, gasping, "They're coming! Please, go!" As we sped away, I glanced back, my blood freezing. The villagers stood at the forest's edge, their masked faces illuminated by the car's taillights, their eyes gleaming with a hunger that wasn't human. The trucker drove me to a police station, his silence a comfort as I pieced together my story. But the authorities were skeptical, their questions laced with doubt. They found Veersbo, but it was deserted, its houses empty, its church silent, as if the village had vanished with its inhabitants. John and Helena were gone, their names absent from any record, and my tale was dismissed as a traveler's delusion, a product of exhaustion and fear. I returned to the States, my backpacking days over, the world smaller, darker, its edges sharper. But Veersbo haunts me, its memory a scar that throbs in the quiet of night. I scour maps, searching for a village that doesn't exist, and sometimes in crowds I catch a glimpse of an elderly couple, their smiles too warm, their eyes too cold. I wonder what they wanted, why they chose me, and the unanswered questions are a weight I'll carry forever. If you're offered a detour to a hidden paradise, a place too perfect to be true, heed the prickle of instinct and walk away. Because some villages are traps, their smiles masks, and once you step into their embrace, you may never leave. The old farmhouse stood like a weathered sentinel on the edge of a sprawling meadow in rural Vermont, its clapboard walls silvered by time, its gabled roof crowned with a weather vane that creaked in the autumn breeze. My wife, Lena, and I had dreamed of escaping Boston's relentless churn for years. And when we found this 19th century gem, 20 acres of wildflower-strewn fields, a price too good to be true, we seized it. pouring our savings into a new beginning. The first weeks were a pastoral idyll, our days filled with sanding floors, planting a garden, and marveling at the silence that wrapped us like a quilt. But as the golden days gave way to crisp nights, a shadow crept into our haven, carried on scraps of paper with jagged scrawl, their words a poison that turned our sanctuary into a place of dread. We'd moved in under a sky ablaze with September light, the meadow a riot of asters and goldenrod, the air alive with the hum of bees and the distant lowing of a neighbor's cattle. The house was a fixer-upper, its floors scuffed, its windows drafty, but it was ours, a canvas for the life we'd always wanted. Lena, a painter, set up her easel in the attic, capturing the meadow's hues, while I, a freelance writer, claimed a corner of the living room, my laptop humming with half-finished essays. At night, we'd sit on the porch, sipping cider, the stars a dazzling canopy unmarred by city glow. It was perfect, a dream made real until the first note appeared, a small, innocuous intrusion that cracked the foundation of our peace. It was tucked under the doormat, a folded slip of paper with rough edges, discovered when I swept the porch one morning. Lovely home, it read, the handwriting jagged, almost childlike, as if scrawled in haste. Lena and I exchanged smiles, assuming it was a neighbor's welcome, a quaint gesture from the tight-knit community a mile down the road. We'd met a few locals, a dairy farmer, a retired school teacher, and their warmth had eased our city-bred wariness. But the note's oddity lingered, a faint discord in the meadow's harmony. And I found myself checking the locks that night, a precaution I hadn't needed before. A few days later, another note appeared, pinned to the porch railing, its message sharper, more intrusive. You should secure your windows at night. My stomach twisted as I read it. The words a subtle threat, a violation of our newfound safety. We always lock up, Lena said, her voice tinged with unease, her fingers tracing the paper's edge. Don't we? I nodded, but doubt crept in, and I spent the evening testing every window, every door. The creak of the old house suddenly ominous. The meadow, once a source of joy, now felt exposed, its vastness a stage for unseen watchers. The notes multiplied, each one bolder, more unsettling, appearing in places that defied logic, slipped under a flower pot on the second-story balcony, wedged into the mailbox's seam, taped to a fence post at the meadow's far edge. I watch you in the mornings. Your wife hums when she paints. Soon. Each message was a needle, pricking our peace, their handwriting a consistent scrawl that haunted my dreams. We called the sheriff, a grizzled man named Hargrove, who took our report with a practiced calm, his deputies scouring the property for clues. But they found nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no trace of how someone could breach our locked home. Could be a prank, Hargrove said, his tone skeptical. Kids, maybe. We'll keep an eye out. His words were hollow, a bandage on a wound that grew with every note. We installed new locks, a security system with cameras that blinked like wary eyes. But the notes persisted, slipping through our defenses with eerie precision. One appeared inside the house, tucked into the frame of our bedroom mirror, its message a dagger. I see you when you sleep. The scrawl was unmistakable, but the ink was red, viscous, smelling faintly of iron, a detail that turned Lena's face pale and sent me scrambling to check the cameras. The footage showed nothing. No figure, no movement, just the meadow's stillness under a moonless sky. How? Lena whispered, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she clutched my arm. How are they doing this? Fear became our constant companion, a shadow that followed us through the house's creaking halls. Lena stopped painting, her easel gathering dust, while I abandoned my writing. My focus consumed by the need to protect our home. We barely slept, jumping at every sound, The wind in the chimney, the groan of settling wood. Our eyes scanning the meadow for signs of intrusion. The notes grew more personal, their words a twisted intimacy. You look tired today. Lena's new dress is blue. It's almost time. We reported each one, but the sheriff's visits yielded nothing, his patience thinning with our desperation. We're doing all we can, he said, but his eyes said otherwise, as if we were city folk spooked by rural quirks. The truth began to crystallize, a suspicion that pointed to our closest neighbor, Amos Reed, a reclusive widower who lived a half-mile away. His farm bordered ours, its sagging barn visible from our porch. And though he'd been cordial at first, his demeanor had soured, his visits marked by cryptic comments about outsiders and city ways. I'd seen him watching us from his field, his silhouette a dark smudge against the horizon, and once, I'd caught a glimpse of his handwriting on a feed order. Jagged, uneven, eerily familiar. Lena resisted the idea, clinging to the hope of a misunderstanding. But the note's persistence, their violation of our sanctuary, eroded her doubts. We confronted Amos one crisp morning, driving to his farm under a sky heavy with clouds. His house was a crumbling relic, its windows curtained, its yard littered with rusted machinery. He answered the door, his face gaunt, his eyes glinting with a feverish intensity that made my skin crawl. "What do you want?" he growled, his voice rough, his hands twitching at his sides. "We know it's you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, holding up the latest note, its red ink stark against the paper. "These stop now, or we're pressing charges." Amos's lips curled into a sneer, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can come here, take my land's peace and accuse me?" His words were a venomous hiss, and I saw it then, a flicker of madness, a mind unhinged by solitude or something darker. Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Leave us alone, Amos. We just want to live in peace." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed across the meadow. "Peace? You don't belong here." "Never did." He slammed the door, the sound a gunshot in the quiet, and we drove back, our hearts pounding, the confrontation a spark that ignited our fear into resolve. We installed more cameras, kept a baseball bat by the bed, but the notes continued, their messages a crescendo of threat. "You can't stop me. I'm inside now." The breaking point came on a moonless night, the meadow cloaked in darkness, the air thick with the scent of impending rain. I woke to a sound, a faint scratching, like nails on glass, coming from the living room. Lena stirred beside me, her eyes wide with terror, and we crept downstairs, the bat heavy in my hands. The front door was ajar, a cold breeze slithering through, and on the coffee table lay a new note, its scrawl a scream in the candlelight. "Tonight." My blood ran cold. The violation of our home a wound too deep to bear. We called the sheriff, our voices shaking, and waited. The bat a futile shield against the fear that consumed us. Hargrove arrived with a deputy, their flashlights sweeping the meadow, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of entry, only the note. Its red ink, a silent accusation. "Could be a hoax," Hargrove said, but his eyes were troubled, as if he sensed the truth we couldn't voice. The note stopped after that, the meadow falling silent, but the damage was done. Amos was questioned, his denials vehement, his mental state a question mark. But without evidence, the case stalled. We couldn't stay. The farmhouse, once our dream, was a prison, its walls tainted by the intruder's touch. We sold it at a loss, fleeing to a condo in Burlington, where the hum of city life drowned out the meadow's ghosts. But the notes followed us in memory, their scrawl etched into our dreams, a reminder that safety is a fragile illusion. I see Amos's face in crowds, his mad eyes watching, and I wonder if he was alone. If the meadow itself was complicit, its silence a canvas for our fear. Lena paints again. Her canvas is darker now. And I write, my words a shield against the past. But the messages linger, a whisper that some secrets are too deep to bury, and some homes, no matter how loved, are never truly ours. The Mississippi River had turned traitor, its swollen waters breaching levees and swallowing entire towns in a deluge that left the Gulf Coast gasping. I joined the relief effort as a volunteer with Crescent Aid, a nonprofit heralded for its swift response to disasters, driven by a need to do something tangible in the face of such devastation. My name's Caleb, a former social worker turned carpenter, and though I'd seen hardship before, the flood's aftermath was a gut punch. Families wading through muddied homes, children clutching salvaged toys, communities reduced to rubble and grief. For weeks, I hauled supplies, rebuilt shelters, and offered what comfort I could. My hands calloused, but my spirit buoyed by the collective resolve. But beneath the surface of Crescent Aid's noble facade, a rot festered. And when I glimpsed its shadow, I stepped into a battle that would cost me everything I knew. The relief headquarters was a repurposed community center in Biloxi, its cinder block walls humming with activity, volunteers sorting donations, radios crackling with updates, whiteboards scrawled with logistics. The air was thick with the scent of instant coffee and damp clothing, a testament to the endless hours we poured into the effort. I'd been assigned to distribution, driving trucks loaded with food, blankets, and medical supplies to outlying towns. Each trip a reminder of the flood's merciless reach. The work was grueling but rewarding, the gratitude in survivors' eyes a light in the chaos. Yet as the weeks wore on, a discordant note emerged, faint at first, like a crack in a foundation, but impossible to ignore. It started with whispers among the volunteers, supplies vanishing from storage, donations arriving short, families receiving half the aid promised. I overheard grumblings in the break room, hushed voices questioning the math. We sent 10 crates to Bayou La Batre, but they only got 4. That grant from the feds was supposed to cover generators. So where are they? I brushed it off as fatigue, as the inevitable chaos of a crisis. But the discrepancies piled up, each one a pebble in a growing avalanche. Then, one sweltering afternoon, I saw it. A ledger left open on a supervisor's desk, its numbers a damning confession. Thousands of dollars in donations marked as allocated but unaccounted for. Supplies listed as delivered to towns I knew had received nothing. My heart sank, the truth a cold weight. Someone was stealing from the flood's victims, siphoning hope from those who needed it most. The ledger belonged to Marcus Tate, Crescent Aid's regional director, a man whose charisma masked a calculating edge. He was a fixture at press conferences, his polished speeches lauded by donors. But behind closed doors, his temper was a storm, his authority absolute. I'd seen him berate volunteers for minor errors, his eyes glinting with a control that chilled me. The ledger was a glimpse into his shadow empire, but confronting him directly was suicide. He was connected, untouchable, his allies spanning local government and beyond. I stood frozen in the office, the hum of the center a distant roar, my mind wrestling with a choice that could unravel my life, expose the corruption and risk retaliation, or stay silent and let the theft continue. I chose to dig deeper, a decision born of outrage but tempered by caution. I couldn't do it alone. So I reached out to other volunteers, testing the waters with careful questions. Maya, a nurse with a sharp mind, had noticed missing medical supplies. Javier, a logistics driver, had tracked discrepancies in fuel budgets. Together, we formed a quiet alliance, meeting in stolen moments, behind the supply tent, in parked vans, our voices low, our eyes scanning for eavesdroppers. We were amateurs playing a dangerous game, but the stakes were too high to back down. The flood's victims deserved better, and we were their last line of defense. Our investigation was a tightrope walk, each step fraught with peril. I photographed documents, recorded conversations, and tracked deliveries. My phone a vault of evidence that grew heavier with every file. Maya infiltrated the finance office, copying receipts that showed payments to shell companies. Javier followed trucks to unmarked warehouses, snapping photos of crates diverted from their routes. The deeper we dug, the uglier the truth became. Crescent Aid was a front, its relief efforts a veneer for a network of embezzlement that stretched across state lines. Tate and his inner circle were skimming millions, their greed a cancer that fed on disaster's chaos. The fear was constant, a knot in my gut that tightened with every close call. My apartment was ransacked one night, its contents strewn but nothing stolen, a warning carved in chaos. Another time, a black SUV tailed me for hours through Biloxi's rain-slicked streets, its presence a silent threat. I stopped sleeping, my nights spent checking locks, my days haunted by the certainty that we were being watched. Maya found a tracker on her car. Javier, a threatening note slipped under his door. Yet we pressed on, driven by the faces of the flood's survivors, their resilience a fire that fueled our resolve. After 6 weeks, our evidence was a fortress. Spreadsheets, recordings, photographs, witness accounts. A case that could topple Tate's empire. But the local authorities were a risk, too entangled with Crescent Aid's influence to trust. Instead, we contacted the FBI, sending an encrypted file through a secure drop, my heart pounding as I hit send. The wait was torture, each day a gauntlet of paranoia, my eyes scanning every face for signs of betrayal. I kept working, playing the dutiful volunteer, but the strain was a weight, fraying my nerves, my dreams plagued by visions of exposure. The raid came on a humid Thursday night as I loaded a truck with water pallets, the center's buzz interrupted by a swarm of federal agents, their vests marked with bold letters, their voices sharp with command. They moved like a tide, securing offices, seizing computers, handcuffing Tate and his lieutenants as stunned volunteers watched. Marcus's face was a mask of fury, his eyes locking onto mine for a fleeting moment, a promise of retribution that chilled my blood. I slipped away, my role anonymous, my heart pounding with relief and dread. The agents questioned me later, their respect tempered by warnings. "You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Reed. Be careful." The investigation unraveled a web of corruption that spanned decades. Crescent Aid a cog in a machine that profited from disaster. Tate and his allies had bribed officials, rigged contracts, and laundered funds through a maze of nonprofits, their greed a betrayal of every victim they claimed to serve. My evidence was a cornerstone, the arrests a victory, but the cost was steep. The cartel's reach was long, their vengeance a specter that haunted my steps. The FBI offered witness protection, a new name, a new city, a severance from the life I'd built. I hesitated, the weight of leaving my friends, my family, my very identity a crushing blow. But survival demanded sacrifice, and I said yes. Now, in a small town on the Oregon coast, I'm someone else. A handyman with a quiet life. My past a locked vault. I volunteer at a food bank. My need to help undimmed, but I'm cautious. My eyes scanning for shadows that don't belong. Sometimes a news report of a hurricane or earthquake stirs the old fire. And I wonder who else is out there, fighting the same fight, risking everything to expose the truth. The flood taught me that corruption thrives in chaos, a parasite that feeds on despair. But it also showed me the power of courage, of voices raised against the dark. I miss my old life, but I carry the faces of those we helped, their gratitude a light that guides me through the exile. The well was tainted, but we purified it. And though the cost was my world, the truth was worth the price. The neon sign of Ruby's oasis flickered like a lighthouse in the desolate expanse of Interstate 70. Its crimson and amber glow, a beacon for weary souls crossing the Kansas prairie. I'd been driving through the night, my old pickup rattling along the endless ribbon of asphalt, chasing a new life in Denver after leaving behind a dead-end job in St. Louis. The highway was a void, its darkness broken only by the occasional glint of a mile marker, and hunger gnawed at my stomach, my last meal a gas station sandwich hours ago. When Ruby's sign loomed ahead, promising hot coffee and 24-hour comfort, I pulled into the gravel lot, my tires crunching under the weight of exhaustion. But as I stepped into the diner, the air thick with tension, every eye turning toward me with a mix of suspicion and dread, I knew I'd stumbled into a storm far fiercer than the one brewing in the night sky. The diner was a time capsule, its chrome-edged counter and red vinyl booths frozen in a 1960s dream, the walls plastered with faded posters of soda brands long extinct. The scent of frying bacon and burnt coffee hung heavy, mingling with the faint tang of nervous sweat. Only a handful of patrons occupied the space. A grizzled trucker hunched over a mug at the counter, his eyes fixed on the steam. A young couple in a booth, their hands clasped, their untouched plates a testament to their unease. And behind the counter, a woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her hands trembling as she wiped an already spotless surface. "Sit anywhere, hun," she called, her voice strained, her smile a fragile mask that didn't reach her eyes. I slid into a booth near the window, the vinyl creaking beneath me, my gaze sweeping the room as I tried to pinpoint the source of the tension. The trucker's shoulders were hunched, the couple's whispers urgent, and the waitress, Ruby, I presumed, kept glancing toward the door, her movements jerky, like a deer sensing a predator. I ordered coffee, my voice cutting through the silence, and Ruby nodded, her hands shaking as she poured, the dark liquid sloshing in the mug. "Menu?" I asked, hoping to ease the unease, but she was already retreating, her eyes darting to the couple, then back to the door, as if expecting an unwelcome guest. The bell above the door jangled, a sharp note that electrified the room, and I turned, my heart lurching as three men strode in. Their presence a cold wind that swept away the diner's fragile warmth. They were clad in dark jackets, their faces hard, their movements deliberate, like wolves circling a wounded herd. The leader, a tall man with a jagged scar tracing his cheek, surveyed the room with eyes like flint, his gaze lingering on me for a moment that felt like an eternity, a chill running down my spine. His companions flanked him, their hands hovering near their waists, a silent promise of violence. They took seats at the counter, their boots thudding on the linoleum, and Ruby approached, her posture rigid, her notepad clutched like a shield. "Evening, Ruby," the scarred man said, his voice a low growl, his lips curling into a smile that held no warmth. "Busy night, huh?" Ruby nodded, her throat bobbing, and I caught the name Vince muttered under her breath, a name that carried the weight of fear. "What can I get you, boy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on the counter. Vince leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. "You know what we want, Ruby. First of the month. Remember?" His words were a code, a transaction cloaked in casual menace, and I felt the diner's tension tighten, a bowstring drawn to breaking. Ruby disappeared into the back. Her steps hurried, and the three men turned their attention to us, their gazes predatory, assessing. "Evening, folks," Vince called, his tone mocking. "Don't mind us. Just handling a bit of business." The trucker shrank further into his seat. The couple huddled closer, their faces pale, and I gripped my coffee mug, my knuckles whitening. my mind racing. What had I walked into? A robbery? Something worse? Ruby returned, clutching a small envelope, her hands trembling as she handed it to Vince. He tore it open, counting the contents. Cash, I realized, a thin stack of bills, and his face darkened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "This ain't enough, Ruby," he growled, rising to his feet, his bulk looming over her. "We had a deal. You trying to play me?" "Business has been slow," Ruby pleaded, her voice cracking, her hands raised in a futile gesture of peace. "Please, Vince, I just need a little more time." "Time's up," he snapped, his voice a whip crack, and one of his men stood, moving toward the kitchen with a purposeful stride. A crash of breaking glass followed, then Ruby's stifled cry, a sound that pierced the diner's fragile calm. Something snapped inside me, a spark of outrage ignited by the sight of her fear, by the bullies who thought they could prey unchallenged. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the long drive blurring my judgment, or maybe it was a lifetime of watching the powerful crush the weak. But I found myself on my feet, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Hey," I shouted, my tone sharper than I'd intended, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "Leave her alone." The diner froze, the air thick with the weight of my words. Vince turned slowly, his eyes narrowing, a predator sizing up an unexpected challenger. "Well now," he said, his voice dangerously soft, a smile curling his lips that held no warmth. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero." He took a step toward me, his men shifting, their hands twitching toward their jackets. And I fought the urge to back down. My hands clenched at my sides, the coffee mug a forgotten weight on the table. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Vince continued, his tone a warning, his eyes glinting with malice. "Sit down, keep your mouth shut, and you might walk out of here." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, but the fire in my chest burned brighter. "You're terrorizing these people," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "That makes it my business." The words felt reckless, a challenge I couldn't retract, and I braced for the consequences. My body tensed for a fight I wasn't sure I could win. Vince laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the diner's confines, but before he could respond, the trucker, whose name I'd later learn was Earl, stood, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "He's right," Earl said, his tone firm, his hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. "This has gone on long enough, Vince. You've bled us dry." The shift was electric, a spark that ignited the room. The young couple, Tom and Lila, I'd learned, rose from their booth, their faces pale but resolute, standing beside me in a silent show of defiance. Ruby straightened, her eyes glinting with a spark of courage, her hands no longer trembling. Vince's smile faltered, his gaze sweeping the room, realization dawning that he was outnumbered, his control slipping. His men shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken, and for a moment, the diner held its breath, a standoff poised on the edge of violence. "You're making a mistake," Vince snarled, his voice low, a promise of retribution. "All of you will be back, and you'll pay for this." With a final glare, he turned, his men following, the bell jangling angrily as the door slammed behind them. The diner exhaled, the tension breaking like a dam, and Ruby burst into tears, her shoulders shaking as Earl moved to comfort her, his arm steady around her. "Thank you," Ruby said, wiping her eyes, her voice thick with gratitude. "You don't know what you've done for us." Over the next hour, fueled by fresh coffee and slices of Ruby's peach pie, the story unfolded. Vince and his gang had been extorting businesses along this stretch of highway for years, shaking down diners, gas stations, and motels with threats of violence. Ruby's oasis had been their latest target, her monthly payments a tax on her livelihood, her fear a chain that bound her. No one had dared resist, the gang's reputation a specter that silenced opposition. But my stand, reckless, impulsive, had sparked a fire, a collective courage that had been dormant too long. As the night wore on, more locals arrived, drawn by word of the confrontation, their faces a mix of hope and caution. Farmers, shopkeepers, even a deputy who'd long turned a blind eye. They gathered in the diner, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance, planning to organize, to fight back. Ruby refused to let me pay for my meal, pressing a thermos of coffee into my hands, her gratitude a warmth that countered the night's chill. Tom and Lila gave me their contact, urging me to visit if I passed through again, their smiles a promise of friendship forged in crisis. I left as dawn broke, the prairie bathed in a soft golden light, Ruby waving from the doorway, a figure of resilience against the diner's weathered facade. I never returned to that stretch of highway, my new life in Denver keeping me tethered. But I think of Ruby's oasis often, of the night I stumbled into a small-town drama and perhaps helped tip the scales. I wonder if they broke free, if their courage held against Vince's threats, if Ruby's diner still stands as a beacon for the weary. I hope so, because that night taught me that bravery can spark in the unlikeliest moments, that one voice can ignite a chorus, and that sometimes the most ordinary places hold the seeds of extraordinary change. As I drive through new nights, past other diners glowing in the dark, I carry that memory, a reminder that standing up, even when it's terrifying, can light a fire that burns long after you're gone. The cul-de-sac on Willow Lane bloomed with the quiet charm of suburban Virginia, its tidy lawns and blooming dogwoods a canvas of ordinary dreams. My house, a modest Cape Cod with a wraparound porch, was my refuge after a bruising divorce, a hard-won anchor in a sea of upheaval. I'd spent months rebuilding, painting walls a soft sage, tending a small herb garden, reclaiming the life I'd nearly lost. When the moving van rolled into the vacant house next door, disgorging a family that seemed plucked from a postcard, I felt a flicker of hope, a chance for new neighbors to breathe life into our sleepy street. The Harrisons, David, Rachel, and their 6-year-old daughter Lily were the picture of perfection, their smiles bright, their manners impeccable. But as I stand here now, barricaded in my bedroom, the door splintering under David's relentless blows, a kitchen knife gleaming in his hand, I know I misjudged them, that their flawless facade hid a darkness that threatens to consume us all. The Harrisons arrived on a sun-dappled Saturday in June. Their arrival a spectacle of efficiency, boxes neatly labeled, furniture carefully arranged, Lily skipping across the lawn with a stuffed lamb clutched tight. David was tall, broad-shouldered with a disarming grin that crinkled his eyes while Rachel was delicate. Her auburn hair swept into a loose bun, her voice soft but warm. Lily was a wisp of a girl, her laughter like wind chimes, her shyness melting under gentle encouragement. I watched from my porch, sipping iced tea, a pang of envy stirring for the family I'd once hoped to build. Determined to be a good neighbor, I baked a tray of lemon bars and crossed the lawn, the grass cool beneath my sandals. Rachel answered the door, her smile radiant, her hands dusted with flour from unpacking. "Oh, how kind," she exclaimed, accepting the bars, her warmth disarming my nerves. "David, Lily, come meet our neighbor." They gathered, a tableau of domestic bliss, David's handshake firm, Lily peeking from behind her mother's skirt. "I'm Nora," I said, kneeling to Lily's level. "I love your lamb. Does she have a name?" "Miss Woolley," Lily whispered, her eyes bright, and I smiled, charmed by her innocence. David clapped me on the shoulder, his voice hearty. "Great to meet you, Nora. We're thrilled to be here. This street feels like home already." Their ease, their warmth was a balm, and I left feeling lighter. hopeful for a friendship that could mend the cracks in my solitary life. Over the next few weeks, the Harrisons wove themselves into the fabric of Willow Lane. Rachel joined the neighborhood gardening club, her roses quickly outshining ours. David coached soccer for the local kids, his enthusiasm infectious. They hosted a 4th of July barbecue, their backyard alive with laughter, string lights, and the sizzle of burgers. Everyone adored them, their charm a magnet that drew the street together. I grew close to Rachel, our mornings spent over coffee in her pristine kitchen. Her stories of their old life in Ohio light but vague, her laughter a melody that eased my loneliness. "I'm so glad we landed here," she confided one day, her hands wrapped around a mug. "It's a fresh start, you know, after, well, after some challenges." Her smile faltered, a shadow crossing her face. But she waved it away, and I didn't press, respecting the boundaries of new friendship. But as summer faded into autumn, cracks appeared in their perfect veneer, subtle at first like hairline fractures in porcelain. Rachel flinched when David raised his voice, a reflex she tried to hide. Their arguments, muffled but sharp, drifted through open windows late at night. Lily grew quieter, her laughter rare, her eyes often fixed on the floor. Miss Woolley clutched like a lifeline. I caught David staring at me from his driveway, his gaze cold, calculating, a stark contrast to his usual warmth. I told myself I was projecting, my own failed marriage coloring my perception, but the signs multiplied, each one a pebble in a growing pile of doubt. One crisp October afternoon, I was pruning my rosemary when a crash echoed from the Harrisons' house, followed by Rachel's stifled cry. I froze, shears in hand, my heart pounding as I strained to hear more. Silence followed, then David's voice, low and controlled, its words indistinct but laced with menace. Rachel didn't cry out again, but the sound haunted me, a wound that festered through the night. I debated intervening, my mind wrestling with the fear of overstepping, of misreading a private moment. But the memory of Rachel's flinch, Lily's withdrawal, was a call I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I invited Rachel over for tea, determined to tread carefully. She arrived with a faint bruise on her wrist, poorly concealed by a long sleeve, her smile brittle. "Rachel," I said softly, stirring honey into my cup, "is everything okay? I heard something yesterday." Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear breaking through her composure. But she laughed, the sound forced. "Oh, I dropped a pan. Clumsy me." Her fingers twisted in her lap, and I pressed gently, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. You and Lily, you're not alone." Her gaze darted away, her lips trembling, and for a moment I thought she'd confide. But she stood abruptly, her smile a mask. "We're fine, Nora, really. David's wonderful." The lie hung between us, a fragile thread, and I let it go, cursing my cowardice as she left. Her steps hurried, her shoulders hunched. The change was immediate. Rachel stopped visiting, her greetings on the street curt, her eyes avoiding mine. David's stares grew bolder, his presence a looming shadow as he mowed his lawn or washed his car, his gaze a silent warning. I felt the weight of their scrutiny, a pressure that turned my home into a fortress. My locks checked obsessively, my nights sleepless. I considered calling a hotline, alerting the police, but fear of retaliation, of ruining a family on suspicion alone, held me back. I was a bystander, paralyzed by doubt, until the night Lily's scream shattered the silence, a cry of terror that propelled me into action. It was past midnight, the street cloaked in darkness, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I'd been reading by the window, unable to sleep, when the scream pierced the quiet, high and desperate, quickly muffled. I was out my door before I could think, my robe flapping as I pounded on the Harrisons, the wood cold under my fists. David answered, his hair mussed, his eyes blazing with a fury that stopped my breath. "What the hell do you want?" he snarled, his voice a low growl, his frame filling the doorway. "I heard Lily," I stammered, my voice shaking, my hands clenched to hide their trembling. "Is she okay?" His expression shifted, a mask of concern sliding into place. But it was too late. I saw the truth in his eyes, the rage barely contained. "Nightmare kinamai," he said smoothly, his smile a lie. "She's fine. Go home, Nora." But over his shoulder I glimpsed Rachel, her face swollen, blood trickling from a split lip, her eyes meeting mine in a silent plea. Lily clung to her sobs muffled, her small body trembling. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. David's facade cracked, his face twisting into a snarl. "You're not calling anyone," he growled, lunging forward, his hand closing around my arm. I yanked free, stumbling back, but he was faster, dragging me into the house, the door slamming shut like a coffin lid. What followed was a nightmare of rage and desperation. David alternated between threats and gaslighting, his voice a venomous hiss one moment, a pleading whine the next. "You're imagining things," he said, his grip bruising as he shoved me toward the living room. "We're a happy family. Tell her, Rachel." Rachel huddled on the couch, Lily in her arms, her eyes downcast, her silence a scream. I broke free, sprinting for the guest bedroom. My phone, thank God, slipped into my robe pocket, a lifeline. I barricaded the door with a dresser, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice a beacon in the chaos. "Help's coming," she said. "Stay where you are." David was at the door now, pounding, his voice a roar that shook the walls. "Open the damn door, Nora." The wood splintered, each blow a countdown to disaster, and I clutched a lamp base, its weight a meager defense. Blue and red lights flashed outside, a salvation I feared would come too late. The door gave way with a final terrible crack, and David burst in, a kitchen knife gleaming in his hand, his eyes wild with madness. Time slowed, the knife arcing toward me, Rachel's scream echoing from the hall, Lily's sobs a piercing wail. Then, voices, sharp, authoritative. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Officers flooded the room, their guns drawn, their commands a thunder that broke the spell. David froze, confusion replacing rage, and the knife clattered to the floor as they tackled him, his curses swallowed by the chaos. I sank to my knees, tears streaming, the lamp falling from my hands as the reality of survival crashed over me. Rachel and Lily were let out, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale but alive. While David was cuffed, his glare a promise of hatred as he was shoved into a patrol car. The aftermath was a blur of statements, flashing lights, and neighbors' curious stares. A female officer, her voice gentle, approached as dawn painted the sky. "You did the right thing," she said, her hand on my shoulder. "You saved them." But as I watched Rachel and Lily climb into an ambulance, their silhouettes fragile against the morning light, guilt gnawed at me. I'd seen the signs, Rachel's flinches, Lily's silence, and done nothing. My fear of overstepping a chain that bound me. The officer sensed my turmoil, her voice firm. "Don't carry that weight. You acted when it counted." The Harrisons' house stood empty in the weeks that followed, its windows dark, its lawn untended. I learned fragments of their past, towns left behind, whispers of abuse, a trail of broken lives David had woven. Rachel and Lily moved to her sisters in Maine, seeking a new start, and I prayed they'd find peace, a canvas free of his shadow. My home, once a haven, felt tainted, its walls echoing with the night's terror, and I sold it, moving to an apartment in Alexandria, where the city's hum drowned out the silence. But Willow Lane lingers, a scar on my heart. I see Lily's face in every child, hear Rachel's cry in every quiet moment, and I wonder how many others saw the signs and looked away. I volunteer at a women's shelter now, my time a small atonement, a vow to never again be a bystander. The darkness next door taught me that evil can wear a neighbor's smile, that courage is a choice made in fear's shadow. And every night, as I check my locks, I listen, ready to act if another scream pierces the dark, determined to be the light I failed to be before. The old Victorian on Cedar Lane stood like a forgotten aristocrat at the edge of Asheville's outskirts, its gingerbread trim and stained glass windows whispering of a bygone era. I'd been a real estate agent for 12 years, navigating the ebb and flow of North Carolina's housing market with a practiced ease. My days filled with open houses and client calls, my nights dreaming of commissions that could fund a quiet retirement. The call came as I was locking up my office, the sky bruising into dusk, a gravelly voice on the line insisting on a last-minute showing. It was irregular, a red flag in a business built on schedules, but the promise of a serious buyer for a property that had languished on the market was too tempting to refuse. As I drove through the gathering twilight, the house's silhouette looming against the Blue Ridge foothills, a prickle of unease stirred, a whisper that this showing was no ordinary transaction. When I saw the glint of a blade in his hand, his cold eyes locking onto mine, I knew I'd walked into a trap, and the empty house was a stage for a nightmare I might not survive. The call had come from a man identifying himself as Mr. Thompson, his voice rough, impatient, but laced with an urgency that piqued my interest. "I'm only in town tonight," he'd said, his words clipped. "Heard about the Cedar Lane place. Sounds perfect. Can you meet me there in an hour? I'll make it worth your time." The Victorian had been a tough sell. Its remote location, its creaking bones, and persistent rumors of hauntings had scared off buyers despite its charm. A quick sale could be a coup, a feather in my cap, and I ignored the twinge of caution, agreeing to meet him at 7:30 p.m. The hour late, but not unheard of for a motivated client. I arrived as the last light bled from the sky, the house's spires casting jagged shadows across the overgrown lawn. Its wraparound porch sagged under the weight of neglect, and the windows, dark and unyielding, seemed to watch my approach, their leaded panes glinting like eyes. No other car was in sight, the gravel drive empty, and I checked my watch, the seconds ticking past the appointed time. I parked under a gnarled oak, its branches clawing at the sky, and stepped out, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl, and I clutched my keys, their familiar weight a small comfort as I climbed the porch steps, the boards creaking under my heels. "Mr. Thompson?" I called, my voice swallowed by the house's looming bulk, the front door a yawning portal into darkness. No answer came, and I hesitated, my hand on the lockbox, the chill of the evening seeping through my blazer. He was late, I told myself, or perhaps exploring the grounds, a common quirk of eager buyers. I unlocked the door, its hinges groaning, and flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the foyer's gloom. The interior was a time capsule, dusty chandeliers, warped hardwood floors, wallpaper peeling in delicate curls. I began my mental checklist, rehearsing the pitch I'd give. Historic charm, endless potential, a steal for the right visionary. 10 minutes passed, then 15, my unease growing with each tick of my watch. I paced the foyer, the flashlight's beam dancing across faded portraits and cobwebbed corners. The house's silence, a weight that pressed against my chest. Just as I reached for my phone to call Thompson, a shadow moved at the edge of the property, a figure emerging from the trees, tall and clad in dark clothing, his face obscured by a low-brimmed hat. My heart quickened, relief warring with caution. "Mr. Thompson?" I called again, stepping onto the porch, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded, approaching with a slow, deliberate stride, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Harper," he said, his voice softer now, almost soothing, but laced with an undercurrent that set my nerves on edge. Up close, he was lean, his face weathered, his eyes shadowed under the hat, glinting with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Was just taking a look around. Nice place you got here." His smile was thin, a crescent that didn't reach his eyes, and I forced a professional nod, gesturing toward the door. "Shall we start the tour?" I asked, my tone bright despite the growing knot in my stomach. He followed me inside, his presence a heavy shadow at my back, his silence unnerving as I launched into my spiel. Original woodwork, spacious rooms, a fixer-upper's dream. The house seemed to close in around us, its walls absorbing my words. The air thick with dust and something darker, a tension I couldn't name. Thompson showed no interest, his eyes roving not to the features I highlighted, but to the corners, the exits, as if mapping a battlefield. His lack of questions, his eerie calm, was a warning I should have heeded, but I pressed on, determined to close the deal. We reached the master bedroom on the second floor, its bay window framing the moonlit foothills, the hardwood floors gleaming under my flashlight's beam. I was midway through describing the room's potential when I realized Thompson was no longer behind me. I turned, my beam sweeping the space, and found him by the door, his silhouette stark against the hallway's gloom. The door was closed, a detail that sent my pulse racing. He hadn't touched it, hadn't moved, yet it was shut, sealing us in. "Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice trembling, my hand tightening on the flashlight. "Is everything all right?" He smiled, a cold, mirthless expression that turned my blood to ice. "Oh, everything's just fine, Miss Harper," he said, his voice a low purr, his eyes glinting with a hunger that wasn't human. "But there's been a misunderstanding. I ain't here to buy this house." He took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. A knife, its blade catching the moonlight, a wicked crescent in his hand. "We're here because this is where it happens, where you disappear." Terror gripped me, a vice that crushed my breath, the reality of my situation a hammer blow. I was alone, miles from help, trapped in an empty house with a killer. My mind raced, searching for escape. The window was too high, its frame likely rusted shut. The door was blocked, his bulk a barrier I couldn't breach. "Please," I stammered, backing away, my flashlight shaking in my grip. "You don't have to do this. I won't say anything. Just let me go." He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the room's hollow expanse. "Oh, I gotta do this, darling. It ain't personal. You're just convenient." His words were a death knell. And he advanced, slow and deliberate, a predator savoring the hunt. I retreated, my back hitting the wall, the plaster cold against my spine. My eyes locked on the knife, its blade a promise of pain. Regrets flooded me, not trusting my instincts, coming here alone, chasing a sale over safety. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flared. I wasn't ready to die, not here, not like this. As he raised the knife, time slowed, the world narrowing to the glint of steel, the thud of my heart. I saw an opening, his weight shifted, his arm extended, and I acted, lunging forward, my shoulder slamming into his chest. The impact caught him off guard, his breath escaping in a grunt as he stumbled, the knife clattering to the floor. I dove for the door, yanking it open, and ran, my heels pounding the creaking stairs. My flashlight abandoned, the moonlight my only guide. His footsteps thundered behind, heavy and relentless, his curses a roar that filled the house. I reached the foyer, my hands fumbling with the front door's lock, panic making my fingers clumsy. The bolt slid free just as his hand closed around my arm, yanking me back with a force that stole my breath. I screamed, the sound tearing through the night, and fought, my elbow connecting with his ribs, his grip loosening for a fleeting second. I broke free, wrenching the door open, and sprinted into the yard, the gravel biting into my soles, my car a beacon under the oak. His shouts followed, a predator's rage, but I didn't look back, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys, the lock clicking open as I threw myself inside. In the rearview mirror, I saw him on the porch, his silhouette a nightmare against the house's dark bulk, his eyes glinting with a fury that promised retribution. I peeled out, gravel spraying, the Victorian shrinking as I sped down Cedar Lane, my heart pounding, tears blurring my vision. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, my breath ragged, my story spilling out to a stunned desk sergeant. The aftermath was a whirlwind of statements, crime scene teams, and revelations that chilled me to the bone. The man, Gerald Kane, not Thompson, was a serial killer, using vacant houses as his hunting grounds, luring agents with fake appointments. The Victorian held secrets, hidden rooms, bloodstains, trophies from victims who hadn't escaped. They caught him 2 weeks later, his face plastered across the news, a monster unmasked. I quit real estate. The thought of another empty house too much to bear. My career a casualty of that night's terror. Now in a bustling Raleigh condo, I'm a property manager, safe among tenants and city lights. But Cedar Lane lingers, its shadow a scar on my soul. I advocate for agent safety, speaking at conferences, writing warnings, driven by the faces of those who didn't survive Kane's traps. Each for sale sign is a reminder, a whisper that danger can hide in the most ordinary places, and that survival, though a victory, comes at a cost I'll carry forever. The Olympic National Forest unfurled like a living tapestry, its emerald canopy and mist-shrouded peaks, a siren's call to my restless spirit. I'd planned this weekend retreat for months, a chance to escape Seattle's concrete pulse and reconnect with my closest friends. Evan, my oldest confidant, his fiancée Mia, and our mutual friend Leo, a photographer with a knack for finding beauty in the wild. We'd chosen a remote cabin in Ravens Hollow, a secluded enclave far from the crowded trails, discovered through a niche rental site promising solitude and serenity. The drive up was a riot of laughter and nostalgia, our SUV weaving through fern-choked roads, the air alive with the scent of cedar and rain. But as night fell, cloaking the hollow in an impenetrable dark, a twig's snap and the murmur of unseen voices turned our sanctuary into a hunting ground, revealing a terror that would haunt us long after we fled its grasp. We'd stopped at a weathered trading post in Forks, the last outpost before the forest's heart, stocking up on firewood and snacks. The clerk, a grizzled woman with eyes like storm clouds, had studied us with a wary frown when we mentioned our destination. Ravens Hollow ain't a place folks visit much anymore, she'd said, her voice low, her hands pausing over the register. Used to be a draw, but things changed. Keep your wits about you. We dismissed her words as rural superstition, a tale to spook city dwellers, and drove on, our spirits high, the forest's grandeur swallowing our doubts. If only we'd listened, we might have avoided the nightmare that waited in the shadows. The cabin was a rustic jewel, its log walls nestled in a clearing ringed by towering pines. A creek's soft babble, a gentle counterpoint to the wind's sigh. We arrived at dusk, the sky a blaze of crimson and gold, and set up camp with practiced ease. Tents pitched, a fire pit sparked to life, lanterns casting a warm glow. That first night was a dream, our voices weaving through ghost stories and college memories. The fires crackle, a heartbeat in the dark. We roasted marshmallows, their sweetness lingering on our tongues, and fell asleep under a star-strewn sky. The forest a cradle that lulled us into a false sense of peace. The second day dawned crisp and clear, and we spent it exploring, hiking trails that wound through moss-draped cedars and hidden glades. Leo's camera capturing the forest's fleeting magic. But as we trekked back to camp, a stillness settled, the birds' chatter fading, the air heavy with an unspoken menace. Anyone else feel that? I asked, pausing on the trail, my boots sinking into the loamy earth. The others nodded, their faces mirroring my unease. Mia's eyes scanning the trees, Evan's jaw tight, Leo's usual grin replaced by a frown. "It's too quiet," Leo said, his voice low, his camera dangling unused. A rustle in the underbrush made us jump, but it was only a squirrel, its scamper a fleeting relief. We hurried back, our laughter gone, the forest beauty now a mask for something sinister. Our camp was untouched, the tents standing like sentinels, but the clearing felt exposed, the pines' shadows stretching like claws. We built a fire, its light a fragile barrier, but the sense of being watched clung to us, a weight that grew with the falling dark. As we sat around the flames, passing a flask of whiskey, Mia's voice broke the silence, her tone hesitant. "Does anyone else feel eyes on us?" Her words were a spark, igniting our shared fear. Evan pulled her close, but his eyes darted to the tree line, his hand tightening on the flask. "Just the whiskey talking," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I scanned the darkness, my heart quickening, the forest a wall of shadow beyond our fire's reach. Then a scream, Mia's, sharp and piercing, her finger pointing to the edge of the clearing. There, just beyond the firelight, stood a figure, tall and unnaturally still, its features cloaked in shadow, its presence a violation of the night. For a heartbeat we froze, our breaths held, then it turned, melting into the forest with a grace that wasn't human. Panic erupted, Mia sobbing, Evan cursing, Leo's face pale as he clutched his camera. "What the hell was that?" he stammered, his voice high, his bravado shattered. "We need to get inside," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. We doused the fire and scrambled into the cabin, locking the door, its flimsy bolt a meager defense. Sleep was impossible, the night alive with sounds, creaks, rustles, a low hum that seemed to pulse from the forest's heart. "Maybe it was a hiker," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "Lost, drawn to our fire." But Leo shook his head, his eyes wide. "Hikers don't stand like that, Mia. They don't just vanish." Dawn brought no relief, the forest silence heavier, more oppressive. We emerged to find our SUV's tires slashed, deep gashes in the rubber, a deliberate act that turned our stomachs. "We're leaving," Evan said, his voice firm, his eyes scanning the trees. We walked to the trading post, get help. It was 10 miles. A daunting trek, but our only option, our phones useless in the hollow's dead zone. We packed water and snacks, our steps hurried, the forest a labyrinth of threat. An hour into our hike, a twig snapped behind us, sharp and deliberate. We froze, turning slowly, finding only shadows, but I swore I saw movement, a flicker darting behind a tree. "Move faster," I urged, my voice low, my heart pounding. The forest closed in, its branches clawing, its silence a predator's patience. We found a derelict cabin off the trail, its walls sagging, its door ajar, and stepped inside, seeking shelter. The air was musty, thick with neglect, and on a dusty table, we found a faded photograph. A group of men, rifles in hand, standing before the cabin. The clerk from the trading post was there, decades younger, and at the edge a figure, tall, thin, its features blurred, its silhouette chillingly familiar. A floorboard creaked behind us, and we spun to find the clerk herself, a shotgun cradled in her arms, her face etched with sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice heavy. "It ain't safe." Her story poured out, a tale of Raven's Hollow's dark heart, a cult, decades ago, practicing rituals that twisted the land. Their leader, a being not wholly human, bound to the forest by a blood rite after the townsfolk burned their compound. "He hunts," she said, her eyes distant. "Uses fear to break his chains. You're not the first, and unless we stop this, you won't be the last." Her words were a nightmare made real, but the terror of the previous night left no room for doubt. She led us out, her shotgun ready, the forest a gauntlet of shadows. Every rustle, every snap was a threat, the air thick with the weight of pursuit. We were nearly to the road when a sound tore through the silence. A howl, neither animal nor human. A cry of rage and hunger that echoed through the trees. "Run!" the clerk shouted, and we obeyed. Branches whipping our faces, roots snaring our feet. The howl followed, closer, its source crashing through the underbrush. A force that shook the earth. We burst onto the highway, waving frantically at a passing logging truck, its driver screeching to a halt. "Get in!" he yelled, and we piled into the bed, the clerk firing her shotgun into the air as we sped away. I glanced back, my blood freezing. A figure stood at the forest's edge, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its face a blur of malice. One elongated hand raised in a mocking farewell. The truck rounded a bend, and it was gone. But its presence lingered, a shadow on my soul. The police were skeptical, their search of the hollow yielding only our slashed tires and an abandoned cabin. No trace of the figure or its cult. The clerk, whose name we never learned, vanished. Her trading post shuttered. The road to Raven's Hollow blocked by a landslide. We returned to Seattle, our lives forever altered. The forest's call replaced by a fear that clings like damp earth. We don't speak of it, but I see it in Evan's restless eyes, Mia's flinches, Leo's untouched camera. The hollow haunts us, its howl a nightmare's echo, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting, its hunger patient, eternal. I pray the clerk's vigilance holds, but I'll never return to those woods where shadows wear faces and the wild is a predator that never sleeps. The Moonlight Tavern crouched like a weathered sentinel on the fringes of Tulsa, its neon sign casting a ghostly blue glow across the cracked asphalt of Route 66. I'd been tending bar there for 8 months, a late-night gig that paid my way through community college, where I was chasing a degree in criminal justice. The tavern was a haven for the road-weary, truckers, drifters, locals nursing their sorrows, and most nights were a predictable blur of pouring drafts and wiping spills. But tonight, as I polished glasses behind the scarred oak counter, the air hummed with a restless menace, a storm brewing in the shadows. When the crash of breaking glass shattered the tavern's uneasy quiet, and 5 men with malice in their eyes refused to leave, I knew this shift was no longer about serving drinks. It was about survival. The tavern was a relic, its wood-paneled walls adorned with faded beer ads, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 80s. Its air thick with the scent of fried onions and stale hops. My name's Lena, and though the job was grueling, it suited me. The rhythm of pouring, the banter with regulars, the quiet satisfaction of closing up alone. Tuesdays were slow, the crowd thinning by midnight, leaving only a handful of stragglers, a grizzled trucker named Hank, sipping whiskey at the counter, a couple of college kids sharing a pitcher in a booth, and a group of 5 men in a corner table, their laughter loud and jagged, their eyes glinting with a hunger that set my nerves on edge. They'd been there for hours, growing rowdier with each round, their voices a grating chorus that drowned out the radio's soft country twang. I'd cut them off at 11 p.m., their slurred protest met with my firm, practiced smile. "Last call, gentlemen," I'd said, clearing their empty bottles, my tone leaving no room for argument. They grumbled but stayed, their presence a weight that pressed against the tavern's fragile calm. By 1 a.m., with closing time looming, I tried again, my voice louder, more insistent. "All right, folks, time to settle up and head out. We're done for the night." The trucker nodded, tossing a crumpled bill on the counter. The students gathered their jackets, their laughter fading as they slipped out. But the 5 men didn't move, their eyes fixed on me, their silence a challenge that tightened the knot in my chest. The leader, a burly man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his arms, stood, swaying slightly, his grin a slash of menace. "We ain't going nowhere, sweetheart," he slurred, his voice thick with liquor and defiance. "Party's just starting." His friends laughed, a coarse, predatory sound, and I felt the tavern shrink, its walls closing in, the air charged with the threat of violence. "I'm serious," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, my fingers inching toward the phone under the counter. "We're closed. You need to leave, or I'm calling the cops." The words were a gamble, a line drawn in the sawdust, but I hoped the threat would be enough to push them out. The tattooed man, Ricky, I'd later learned, slammed his fist on the table, a bottle toppling with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. "What you gonna do, little girl?" he taunted, vaulting over the counter with a speed that belied his drunken stagger. My phone skittered across the floor, knocked from my hand, and I backed away, my heart pounding. The counter a flimsy barrier between me and his looming bulk. "Let's not get the law involved," he said, his breath hot with whiskey, his eyes glinting with a cruelty that turned my blood to ice. "This is between us." The others stood, spreading out, blocking the exits. The front door, the side entrance, the path to the kitchen. Hank shrank into his seat, his eyes averted, while the students' booth was empty, their absence a silent absence of allies. I was trapped, the tavern a cage, my mind racing for a way out. "Take the till," I said, my voice shaking, gesturing to the cash register. "I won't stop you, just go." My offer was a desperate plea, a hope to buy freedom, but Ricky's laugh was a blade, sharp and merciless. "Oh, we'll take the money," he said, his grin widening, his intentions clear in the leer that raked over me. "But that ain't all we want." His words were a violation, a promise of horrors I couldn't let unfold. Fear surged, but with it came a spark of fury, a defiance born of countless nights facing down drunks, of a life spent proving I was tougher than I looked. I wasn't going down without a fight. My hand closed around a bottle of bourbon on the shelf behind me, its weight solid, a weapon in disguise. I swung, the glass connecting with Ricky's temple in a satisfying thud, the impact sending him staggering, more shocked than hurt. The bottle shattered on the counter, its amber contents spilling like blood, and I seized the moment, vaulting over the bar, dodging the grasping hands of his nearest friend. The tavern erupted in chaos, shouts filling the air, chairs toppling as I sprinted for the kitchen, the back door my only hope. I burst through the swinging doors, my eyes scanning the cluttered space, pots, pans, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. My hand closed around a heavy cast iron skillet, its weight a comfort as I turned, Ricky and 2 others charging in, their faces twisted with rage. "Stay back," I yelled, brandishing the skillet, my voice braver than I felt. Ricky laughed, blood trickling from his temple, and lunged, his movements slowed by alcohol but fueled by fury. I sidestepped, swinging the skillet, the metal cracking against his arm. He howled, stumbling into a rack of cookware, the crash deafening in the confined space. Another man grabbed me from behind, his arm like a vice around my waist, and I thrashed, my elbow connecting with his jaw. He grunted, his grip loosening, and I swung the skillet again, catching him across the cheek, the impact dropping him to the floor. But the third man was on me, his fist raised, and I braced for the blow, my body screaming with exhaustion. The back door burst open, cool night air flooding in, and for a moment, I thought it was salvation. Then two more men entered, their silhouettes blocking the exit, their eyes glinting with the same malice. I was cornered, outnumbered, the skillet heavy in my trembling hands. "I don't want to hurt anyone else," I said, my voice cracking, my eyes darting between them. "Just let me go." Ricky rose, his arm dangling, his face a mask of rage. "You're gonna pay, girl," he snarled, advancing with his uninjured friend. "We were just gonna have fun, but now you're done." The kitchen exploded in light, fluorescence blazing, freezing us all in place. "Police! Nobody move!" A voice barked, sharp and authoritative. Officers swarmed in, their guns drawn, their commands a thunder that shattered the chaos. I dropped the skillet, my legs buckling, and sank against the refrigerator, the cold metal a lifeline as the men were cuffed, their curses fading under the weight of authority. A female officer knelt beside me, her face kind but firm. "You okay, miss?" she asked, helping me to my feet, her touch grounding in the storm's aftermath. I nodded, tears burning my eyes, the reality of survival crashing over me. The police had been tipped off by a regular who'd overheard Ricky's threats earlier, their arrival a miracle I hadn't dared hope for. The men were hauled out, their faces a mix of defiance and shock, and I gave my statement, my voice hoarse, the skillet's weight still echoing in my hands. The tavern was a crime scene now, its quiet shattered, its walls bearing witness to a fight I'd never forget. I didn't return to Moonlight Tavern. The owner, a gruff but kind man, offered me a day job, but the memory of that night, Ricky's leer, the crash of glass, was a scar too raw to touch. The men were charged with attempted assault, their records a litany of similar crimes, my actions a shield for future victims. I threw myself into self-defense training, then martial arts, discovering a strength I'd never known, a fire forged in fear. I teach women now, helping them find their own resilience, each class a step toward healing, a way to reclaim the power that night tried to steal. Sometimes in the quiet of my apartment, I hear that bottle shatter, feel the skillet's weight, see Ricky's eyes burning with hate. The fear lingers, a shadow that flares in dark moments. But it no longer defines me. That night was my crucible, the worst of my life, but also the moment I found my core. A fighter, not a victim. I wear that truth like armor, a reminder that even in the face of terror, I am unbreakable. And no matter what the world throws at me, I'll meet it head on, skillet in hand, ready to stand my ground. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their granite peaks cloaked in pine and shadow, a wilderness that called to my soul with a promise of solitude and challenge. I'd been hiking for years, each trail a pilgrimage to quiet the noise of my city life. But this solo trek through Blackwood Ridge was my boldest yet. A 5-day journey into the heart of California's untamed backcountry. I'd prepared meticulously, my pack heavy with gear, my maps memorized, my body honed by months of training. The first day was a revelation, alpine meadows ablaze with wildflowers, streams glinting like silver threads, vistas that stole my breath. But by the second evening, as dusk draped the ridge in a shroud of violet, a twig snap and the whisper of unseen voices turned my sanctuary into a gauntlet, revealing a terror that would mark me forever. My name's Mara, a graphic designer by trade, but a wanderer at heart. And Blackwood Ridge was a dream I'd nurtured since discovering its obscure trails in a dog-eared guidebook. The path was rugged, its markers sparse, but the solitude was a balm, the forest silence a canvas for my thoughts. I'd passed a few hikers early on, exchanging nods and trail tips, but by noon I was alone, the ridge's vastness swallowing all traces of humanity. The air was crisp, scented with resin and earth, and I moved with purpose, my boots crunching on pine needles, my pack a familiar weight. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the trail, a prickle of unease stirred, a sense that the forest's gaze had turned from indifferent to predatory. It began with small signs, a rustle in the underbrush when the wind was still, a shadow flitting between trees, gone when I turned. I told myself it was wildlife, a deer or a fox, but the feeling of being watched grew, a weight that pressed against my chest. By late afternoon, I'd strayed from the main trail, lured by a shortcut that promised a gentler descent, a decision I'd soon regret. The path narrowed, its markers fading, the forest closing in like a living thing. I checked my map, my compass, but the ridge's labyrinthine folds defied my bearings, and a sickening realization settled in. I was lost, alone in a wilderness that stretched for miles, with night falling fast. I pitched camp in a small clearing, my tent a fragile shield against the dark, my headlamp's beam a flickering defiance. The forest was silent now, too silent. The absence of birdsong a warning I couldn't ignore. I built a small fire, its crackle a comfort, but every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. My phone was useless, its signal long gone, and my flashlight's beam seemed to shrink, the darkness pressing closer. Sleep eluded me, my senses attuned to the night's pulse. And when a voice, low deliberate, called from the trees, my blood turned to ice. "Hello, anyone out there?" it said, the words clear but laced with a cadence that wasn't right, too measured, too hungry. Relief warred with fear. Another hiker, perhaps, lost like me, but the voice's tone, its eerie calm, screamed danger. I froze, my breath shallow, my hand clutching the multi-tool in my pocket, its blade a meager defense. "I'm over here," I called, my voice trembling, a desperate hope that I'd misjudged. Silence answered, then another voice, closer, colder. "We hear you. Stay put. We're coming." My heart pounded. The words a trap, their coordination a hunter's strategy. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming. I doused the fire, grabbed my pack and ran, plunging into the forest, branches whipping my face, roots snaring my boots. Shouts followed, sharp and commanding, their voices a chorus of pursuit. "She went that way! Cut her off!" Each word a lash that drove me deeper into the dark. The forest was a maze, its paths twisting, its shadows alive with threat, and I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my mind a whirl of fear and survival. The voices spoke of a river, a barrier they didn't want me to reach, and I latched onto it as a lifeline, the faint rush of water a beacon in the chaos. I pushed harder, my legs trembling, my headlamp flickering, its beam a frail guide. The forest seemed to resist, its branches clawing, its ground uneven, but I stumbled onto a rocky bank, the river before me, wide, swift, its surface glinting under a sliver of moon. It was too deep to cross, too fast to swim, but it was my only chance. I was about to wade in when a voice rang out, closer than ever. "Stop right there!" I spun, my breath catching as figures emerged from the trees. 5 men, their dark clothing blending with the night, their faces hard, their hands gripping rifles. The leader, older, with a face carved by years of cruelty, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with a predator's glee. Well, well, he said, his voice a low drawl. Look what we caught, a lost little doe. His men spread out, forming a semicircle, their weapons a silent promise of violence. Please, I gasped, my voice hoarse, my body trembling from exertion. I'm just hiking. I got lost. I don't want trouble. He laughed, a sound that chilled my bones. Trouble's what you found, girl. These are our woods, and we don't take kindly to trespassers. His words were a verdict, and I saw the excitement in his men's eyes, a hunger that marked me as prey. We got a tradition here, he continued, his smile widening. A hunt. You get a head start. Make it to sunrise and you're free. If not, he let the threat hang, its weight crushing. I backed toward the river, my eyes darting for an escape. But the men blocked the forest, their rifles trained. 1 minute, the leader said, checking a battered watch. Better make it count. Time slowed, my mind racing, my body coiled with desperation. The river was my only hope. Its roar a challenge I had to meet. As the seconds ticked down, I turned and ran. Not into the forest, but along the bank, my boots slipping on wet stones, the men's laughter a whip at my back. Ready or not, the leader bellowed, and the hunt began, their shouts echoing, their footsteps a thunder that shook the earth. I ran, the river's edge treacherous, my headlamp's beam bouncing wildly. A gunshot cracked, splintering a tree inches from my head, and I stumbled, my heart pounding. Their aim meant to terrify, not kill. Not yet. I spotted a fallen log spanning the river, its surface slick with moss, a perilous bridge, but my only chance. I scrambled onto it, my hands gripping the bark, the water roaring below, ready to claim me if I fell. Another shot rang out, the bullet grazing the log, and I froze, my breath hitching, then forced myself forward, inching across, my body trembling with effort. Halfway across, their shouts grew closer, their flashlights sweeping the bank. She's on the log, one yelled, and I lunged, my foot slipping, my hands clawing for purchase. I reached the far side, collapsing onto the bank, my lungs burning, my eyes locked on the men across the river. The leader stood, his face a mask of rage and grudging respect. This ain't over, he shouted, his voice carrying over the water's roar. These woods are ours, and you'll never outrun us. I didn't wait, plunging into the forest on the other side, the trees a new labyrinth, their shadows both shield and snare. The night was a blur of fear and exhaustion. My body pushed beyond its limits, my mind a single thought, survive. I ran until I couldn't, then walked, then crawled, every sound a threat, every shadow a hunter. As dawn's first light pierced the canopy, I stumbled onto a dirt road, its gravel a miracle under my boots. A pickup truck approached, its driver an elderly farmer, his face creasing with concern as I waved frantically, my voice hoarse. Please, I croaked, collapsing against his door. Help me. He drove me to a ranger station, his silence a comfort as I poured out my story. The voices, the hunt, the men with rifles. The rangers listened, their faces skeptical, but they found my campsite, the slashed footprints circling my tent, a chilling confirmation. No trace of the men, no tracks beyond the river, their existence a ghost in the forest vastness. They called it a miracle I'd survived, attributing my tale to dehydration, fear, a mind frayed by the wild. But the scars on my hands, the terror in my dreams, told a different truth. I returned to Seattle, my love for hiking extinguished, the wilderness now a realm of shadows, not solace. I see those men in every crowd, hear their shouts in every quiet moment, the leader's promise, a chain that binds me. I live in the city now, its lights a shield, but Blackwood Ridge lingers, a scar that throbs in the dark. I wonder if they're still out there, hunting, their tradition a curse on the ridge's heart. I pray no one else wanders into their trap, but the forest is vast, its secrets deep, and some predators never stop. I'll never know their names, their purpose, but I know their eyes, cold, hungry, eternal, and I carry their hunt in my soul, a reminder that the wild is a place where monsters wear human faces, and survival is a victory won at a terrible cost.